This was another azure fox that was over twice the size of Suliu. It was wearing a suit of beautiful golden armor that was riddled with countless flashing silver runes, and there were 9 massive tails trailing along behind it, giving it a very majestic appearance. The 9-tailed fox also had a set of long and thin eyebrows, and there was also a radiant star design on its glabella. At the same time, it was giving off an enormous aura that was slightly superior even to that of the golden beetle. Our king! Fervent looks appeared on the faces of all of the beast race golden immortals at the sight of the 9-tailed fox, while the beast race army down below enjoyed another significant morale boost. Father! Suliu immediately flew over to the 9-tailed fox's side, but the golden beetle wasn't paying any attention to Suliu or the 9-tailed fox. Instead, its golden eyes were roaming over its surroundings, seemingly searching for something. Han Li was rather apprehensive at the sight of the golden beetle's searching gaze, and he couldn't be certain if Jin Tong really would be able to escape its detection by hiding in Xiao Bai's stomach. Thankfully, the golden beetle's gaze swept over him without pause, and that came as quite a relief to him, but he still didn't dare to let down his guard. The 9-tailed fox gave Suliu a stern glare, then raised a front paw to send a burst of azure light flying into Suliu's body. With this injection of azure light, most of Suliu's injuries were instantly healed, and a wide smile appeared on his face as he said, "Thank you, Fa." "Stand down," the 9-tailed fox instructed, cutting him off in a serious voice. Suliu nodded in response, then flew away into the distance. "Leave this place right now, insect spirit. Otherwise, you leave me with no choice but to strike you down," the 9-tailed fox declared in a thunderous voice. Only then did the golden beetle finally turn its gaze to the 9-tailed fox for the first time. In the next instant, it abruptly transformed into a golden shadow, appearing behind the 9-tailed fox in a flash before opening its mouth to release a thick pillar of translucent golden light, which pierced straight through the 9-tailed fox's body in the blink of an eye. The 9-tailed fox remained completely still on the spot, seemingly having failed to react, but in the next instant he abruptly vanished, revealing that body to have only been an afterimage. The golden beetle faltered slightly upon seeing this, and it stopped cold in its tracks. Immediately thereafter, the 9-tailed fox appeared behind it out of thin air amid a flash of azure light, following which its 9 tails shot out like lightning to ensnare the golden beetle, while also releasing an azure spirit domain. At the same time, a layer of black spiritual light emerged over its 9 tails, and starlight was flashing incessantly over the tails as they rapidly constricted, tightening around the golden beetle's body like 9 black pythons. The 9-tailed fox then opened his mouth to release a pillar of black flames that struck the golden beetle before erupting into a sea of fire, and all of this had taken place in the blink of an eye. The sea of fire was giving off bursts of incredibly scorching heat that caused the nearby space to warp and tremble violently, and even though Han Li was quite a distance away from the sea of fire, even he had to fly into the distance, unable to bear the heat. Suliu had also retreated into the distance, as a pleased look appeared in his eyes. Meanwhile, the 9-tailed fox continued its barrage of attacks, and a beam of starlight abruptly shot out of the star design on his glabella. The beam of starlight was formed by countless black starlight runes, and they were plunged into the sea of black flames while giving off tremendous law power fluctuations. As a result, the sea of fire reared up significantly, and the black flames quickly became lighter in color, but the heat that they were giving off only continued to elevate. The nearby space was tainted a black color, and it also began warping far more violently than before, making it appear as if the very space were about to be set alight. The golden beetle was completely inundated by the sea of fire, and it seemed that it had already been incinerated into ashes. Suliu was ecstatic to see this, as were all of the beast race golden immortals, while all of the insect race golden immortals were looking on in horror and despair. However, in the next instant, the sea of fire suddenly began to churn violently, and a rapidly expanding vortex appeared within it, following which a burst of golden light emerged within the vortex. Before the nine-tailed fox had a chance to do anything, the vortex abruptly swelled in size, while the golden light inside also brightened significantly, and all of the black flames were instantly sucked into the vortex. As a result, the golden beetle was revealed, and it was still ensnared within the nine tails, but there was golden light radiating from its mouth as it devoured the final wisp of black fire. The cheering from the beast race army instantly subsided, and the entire battlefield fell still for a moment, while Suliu was also looking on with his mouth agape in shock. How has the insect spirit become so powerful? It stood no chance against Master Yohu during the last war. Newo Yan murmured to herself with a stunned expression. "Is this your king?" Hanli asked. "That's right. Master Yohu is the king that's worshipped by all of our beast race tribes, and he's also the father of our tribe's true spirit, Suliu," Newo Yan replied with a nod. "It sounds like this isn't the first battle between your king and the insect spirit. How does the insect spirit match up against your kind? Does it have any weaknesses?" Hanli asked. "The insect spirit has an incredibly sturdy body and can devour almost all attacks, so I can't think of any physical weaknesses. I recall that Master Yohu had only been able to force it into retreat last time by using some type of spiritual attack," Newo Yan replied. Hanli nodded in response. He knew better than anyone else just how incredible the physical prowess of gold-devouring beetles were. However, compared with their near-indestructible bodies, their souls were indeed far more fragile. Right as Hanli and Newo Yan were conversing with each other, the golden beetle suddenly turned his gaze to the nine tails around its body, following which two thin streaks of translucent golden light erupted out of its front limbs toward the tails. The nine-tailed fox immediately withdrew its tails as quickly as it could while also fleeing into the distance, and even though it had reacted very quickly, two of its tails were still struck by the streaks of golden light. Those two tails were instantly severed, and blood came gushing out of the wounds. The nine-tailed fox drew to a halt close to 10 kilometers away, and a furious look appeared in its eyes at the sight of its severed tails. It thrust its two front paws forward, and two resounding thumps rang out as a pair of giant beastly paw projections, one azure and one black, emerged above the golden beetle. The paw projections were giving off a faint azure glow, within which were countless dancing azure runes, following which an image of a starry night sky emerged on the paw projections. The two projections drew back slightly, then came crashing down upon the golden beetle with tremendous power. The golden beetle gave a disdainful sneer, following which two bursts of golden light that resembled pythons shot out of its body, then pierced through the pair of paw projections with ease before winding themselves around the projections and constricting viciously. A burst of terrifying power instantly began acting upon the pair of paw projections, instantly shattering them into countless specks of azure and black spiritual light, which spread through the entire surrounding area in a radius of close to 10 kilometers. The nine-tailed fox raised its two front paws before drawing a pair of semicircles in midair, and the scattered specks of azure and black light suddenly began to flash before fusing together to form countless black and azure threads of light that wound themselves around the golden beetle. The golden beetle was clearly a little taken aback by this, but it remained completely unfazed as countless streaks of translucent golden light erupted out of its body to strike the black and azure threads of light. These threads of light didn't appear to be all that remarkable, but they were incredibly sturdy, and only less than half of them were severed, while the rest remained firmly in place. A hint of surprise flashed through the golden beetle's eyes upon seeing this, and right at this moment, the nine-tailed fox appeared directly above its head. Black light flashed from the nine-tailed fox's front paws, and two sets of scythe-like black claws that each around 10 feet in length sprang forth. The nine-tailed fox then swooped down with radiant starlight emanating from its claws, which scratched down viciously upon the golden beetle's back to send sparks flying in all directions. A burst of tremendous energy fluctuations erupted in all directions as the golden and black light clashed with immense power, and all of the claws on the nine-tailed fox's front paws were snapped, while only a series of white marks had appeared on the golden beetle's back. The claws hadn't even been able to draw any blood, and the nine-tailed fox's expression instantly darkened significantly upon seeing this. All of a sudden, the golden light radiating from the golden beetle's body abruptly brightened significantly, and translucent threads of golden light could be seen within it, giving off a burst of tremendous suction force. The black light was instantly sucked into the golden light on contact, while the golden light continued to surge toward the nine-tailed fox. The nine-tailed fox was clearly very wary of this golden light, and he immediately sprang away into the distance as an azure shadow. However, right at this moment, the golden light around the golden beetle brightened even further, giving it the appearance of an incandescent golden sun. The radiant golden light rapidly spread outward in all directions to form an enormous golden spirit domain, within which streaks of golden light were swirling around incessantly to form a series of vortexes of different sizes. The nine-tailed fox wasn't able to get very far away at all before it was caught within the golden spirit domain, upon which its speed was significantly hampered. At this point, the threads of azure and black light around the golden beetle's body had already vanished, and it cast a cold gaze toward the nine-tailed fox before opening its mouth to release around a dozen golden law threads. As soon as these law threads shot out of its mouth, they immediately swelled drastically in size while radiating dazzling golden light, with countless golden runes flashing within it. Immediately thereafter, the dozen or so enlarged law threads intertwined to form an extremely lifelike golden worm that was several thousand feet in length. The golden worm was radiating dazzling golden light as it flew through the air with tremendous power and astonishing speed, reaching the nine-tailed fox in the blink of an eye. The nine-tailed fox threw back its head and let loose an almighty roar upon seeing this, and all of the spiritual light within the azure spirit domain converged toward him before forming 6 azure light barriers in front of him. Countless bursts of worm-like spiritual light were flashing and squirming incessantly over the light barriers, giving off tremendous law power fluctuations. The azure light barriers had only just taken shape when the golden worm arrived before crashing into the azure light barriers, which were shattered one after another in rapid succession. However, the golden worm had also been whittled down significantly, having been reduced to around half of its original size, but it hadn't slowed down in the slightest. A stunned look appeared in the nine-tailed fox's eyes upon seeing this, and he opened his mouth to release 2 bursts of light, one black and one azure. The 2 bursts of light then intertwined to form a massive black and azure arrow, which crashed into the golden worm. An earth-shattering boom rang out as a giant ball of golden light emerged, encompassing everything within a radius of several dozen kilometers within it, including the nine-tailed fox. Black and azure lights were interspersed throughout the golden light, but they were clearly being overwhelmed. The entire battlefield was instantly illuminated as a burst of unfathomably enormous spiritual pressure erupted throughout the surrounding area, sweeping up ferocious gusts of wind in all directions. Some of the weaker insect race and beast race warriors were sent flying by the fierce gusts of wind, and they didn't even get a chance to cry out before they were completely dismembered. Right at this moment, a streak of azure light shot out of the ball of golden light, then faded to reveal the nine-tailed fox. At this moment, he was looking quite disheveled, with several long gashes on his body. There was also a large hole on his lower abdomen, and the spiritual light around his body had also dimmed significantly, making it very apparent that he had suffered very severe injuries. "Father!" Suliu exclaimed as he hurriedly arrived by the nine-tailed fox's side, and all of the beast race warriors down below were looking on in despair. Right at this moment, a sharp whistling sound rang out as the golden beetle arrived on the scene as a ball of golden light. Even though the nine-tailed fox was very severely injured, it still stood up straight to face the enemy, while Suliu was also prepared for battle. Right at this moment, a giant white archway abruptly appeared in the sky above the ball of golden light, then crashed down upon the golden beetle. There was a series of ring-shaped designs engraved onto the archway, and they were giving off tremendous spiritual power fluctuations, indicating that this was a very formidable immortal treasure. All of a sudden, the white archway began to glow with intense white radiance, which formed a giant halo that restricted the golden beetle's body within it. Following the emergence of the white halo, the golden beetle was instantly stopped cold in its tracks, much to the surprise of the two azure foxes. "I didn't think that a primordial true spirit like yourself would sink as low as to turn to a wretched human for help." The golden beetle sneered as it swept its front limbs through the air, releasing a vast expanse of translucent golden light that instantly converged to form a streak of light that was several thousand feet in length before crashing into the white archway. A resounding boom rang out as the streak of golden light shattered, and a deep gash was also sliced into the white archway, but it remained intact. The white halo released by the white archway also shrank down significantly, but the golden beetle was very surprised to see that its attack had failed to destroy the target. Right at this moment, a purplish golden giant that was several hundred feet tall and had 3 heads and 6 arms appeared above the white archway. It was none other than Han Li after adopting his holy nirvana physique, and there was a determined look on his face as he swung his arms through the air with immense power. 3 streaks of light, 1 golden, 1 black and 1 white shot out of his hands, and they contained a golden net, a black wooden ruler, and a sheet of white paper, all of which were spoils that he had reaped from the infernal frost immortal manor. The golden net swelled drastically in size before descending upon the golden beetle, while the black ruler also expanded rapidly before striking the beetle. At the same time, countless huge black runes appeared on its surface, then converged to form a black formation that encompassed the golden beetle within it. Meanwhile, the sheet of paper transformed into a vast white mountain in the blink of an eye before crashing down violently. Bursts of white light surged out of the mountain to form a hemispherical white light barrier, which also encompassed the golden beetle. Thanks to the support from the 3 immortal treasures, the white archway was stabilized, and the 4 immortal treasures were temporarily able to trap the golden beetle. However, Han Li didn't let down his guard in the slightest upon seeing this, and he began to chant a rapid incantation. He hadn't decided to enter the fray out of the kindness of his heart. Instead, the problem was that Jin Tong wasn't going to be able to hide in Xiao Bai's body for long, and if Yohu were to be defeated, then he would be forced to face this high zenith stage gold, devouring immortal on his own once Jin Tong inevitably emerged from Xiao Bai's belly. With that in mind, Han Li was casting a rapid string of incantation seals into the 4 immortal treasures with 4 of his hands, while his other 2 hands were swept through the air to release Feng Tiandu's full set of 36 origin separation law chains, which he had obtained in the wake of Feng Tiandu's demise. However, he still hadn't been able to completely refine them, But even so, they had served as Feng Tiandu's bonded treasure, so they naturally contained tremendous law powers, and they were particularly effective in sealing a target's soul. All three of Han Li's heads were chanting an urgent incantation, and the 36 origin separation law chains instantly sprang to life as countless tiny black runes surged out of them, giving off bursts of astonishing law power fluctuations. The golden beetle was very alarmed upon sensing the aura of the origin separation law chains, and it let loose a furious roar as all of the golden light around it abruptly surged back into its body, forming a series of flashing golden spots that resembled countless eyes all over its exoskeleton. A loud shrieking sound rang out as a streak of translucent golden light shot out of each of those golden eyes before striking the four immortal treasures. The golden began to tremble violently, and it was the first one to be torn apart. After that, the black formation formed by the wooden ruler was only able to last a few seconds before it was also destroyed, immediately following which the giant black ruler shattered into countless pieces. The countless streaks of translucent golden light then struck White Archway and the White Mountain in a devastating barrage, but the pair of immortal treasures proved to be surprisingly resilient, managing to hold themselves together, much to Han Li's relief. Both the archway and the sheet of white paper were immortal treasures that had been crafted out of jade materials, and just as he had anticipated, such materials were more adept at warding off attacks from gold-devouring immortals. He began to cycle through his hand seals even more urgently, as all six of his eyes began to glow brightly, and a translucent sword projection suddenly shot out of the glabella of his central head, then reached the golden beetle in a flash. The golden beetle immediately lashed out at the sword projections with its front limbs at an astonishing speed, but before they were able to intercept the sword projection, it had already pierced straight into the golden beetle's head. A pained look instantly appeared on the golden beetle's face, and its massive body began to tremble uncontrollably as it let loose an agonized cry. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this, and he opened his mouth to release a ball of purplish golden blood essence, which transformed into a cloud of purplish golden mist that fused into the 36 origin separation law chains. After absorbing Han Li's blood essence, the runes on the origin separation law chains began to glow even brighter, while the law powers that they released were also further enhanced. As Han Li made one final hand seal, the 36 origin separation law chains abruptly vanished from the spot before reappearing in front of the golden beetle and attempting to burrow their way into its body. Even though the golden beetle was still trembling uncontrollably, it was still able to remain lucid and conscious, and it released a burst of golden light with great difficulty, within which were 30 to 40 radiant golden law threads. The golden law threads began to revolve on the spot, forming a golden vortex that swept up the 36 origin separation law chains to suck them in. An alarmed look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he hurriedly began to make hand seals with all six of his hands, doing everything in his power to stabilize the origin separation law chains. At the same time, another translucent sword projection shot out of his glabella before piercing into the golden beetle's head in a flash. The golden beetle wailed in agony once again, and the golden vortex shuddered slightly, but it remained intact and was continuing to suck in the origin separation law chains. An urgent look appeared on Han Li's face, yet before he had a chance to do anything else, an azure spirit domain abruptly appeared around the golden beetle before rapidly spreading outward in all directions. Han Li immediately turned to discover Yohu flying to him. At the same time, a series of azure law threads emerged around the golden vortex, and there were also around 30 to 40 of them. The azure law threads flew into the golden vortex in a flash to impede the golden law threads, and the speed of revolution of the golden vortex was instantly significantly slowed. Yohu then opened his mouth to release a burst of black and azure light, which formed another giant arrow, and it shrieked through the air before piercing into the golden vortex in a flash. The golden vortex instantly began to bulge before exploding violently, freeing the 36 origin separation law chains, which instantly burrowed their way into the golden beetle's body. An alarmed look appeared in the golden beetle's eyes, and the golden light around its body was fading at a rate that was discernible even to the naked eye before vanishing altogether. Immediately thereafter, its enormous aura also completely faded, and it began to plummet out of the sky like a dead weight. The white archway and the giant mountain had already been severely damaged by the golden beetle's resistance, and finally, both of them exploded in the face of the shockwaves, resulting from the clash between the two high zenith stage jade immortals. The golden beetle was extremely alarmed to discover that its nascent soul had somehow been sealed, rendering it completely unable to draw upon any of its immortal spiritual power. Yohu could also sense what was happening within the golden beetle's body, and he took a surprised glance at Han Li while sweeping his front paws through the air. Several black and azure arrow projections instantly emerged before striking the golden beetle in a flash, and upon being struck by the arrows, the golden beetle's fall was drastically accelerated, sending it crashing into the ground to create an enormous crater. Yohu was just about to give chase when he grimaced in pain, and the azure light emanating from his body quickly faded, immediately followed by his azure spirit domain. "Father!" Suliu hurriedly flew over to Yohu to support him, while also releasing 2 bursts of azure light out of the palms of his paws into Yohu's body. Only then was Yohu's aura somewhat stabilized. Right at this moment, a streak of golden light suddenly erupted out of the giant crater down below, and the golden beetle was flying rapidly into the distance. The exoskeleton on its back had split open and was functioning as a pair of wings. Even though its immortal spiritual power had been sealed, it still possessed its physical prowess, and even with just its wings alone, it was still able to fly at an astonishing speed. "You're not getting away," Suliu roared as he prepared to set off in pursuit. "Let it go," Yohu said. "Even though the insect spirit's immortal spiritual power has been sealed, its physical prowess is still tremendous. With your powers, even if you manage to catch up to it, you won't be able to kill it anyway." Suliu stopped sheepishly in his tracks upon hearing this. Yohu then turned to look at Han Li, who had also refrained from setting off in pursuit of the golden beetle. At this point, he had already reverted back to his human form, and his face was quite pale, while blood was trickling down from the corner of his lips. Even though he had only fought briefly in the battle, he had unleashed virtually all of his trump cards, and he only less than 10% of his immortal spiritual power left. Even with pills and immortal origin stones to replenish himself, he most likely wouldn't have been able to hold on had the gold-devouring immortal just lasted a few more seconds. "Thank you for your assistance, fellow Taoist," Yohu said to Han Li. "You're far too kind. If that insect spirit had come out on top, I would have been in quite a terrible situation," Han Li replied as he wiped the blood from his lips. Yohu looked at Han Li for a moment longer, then began to fly toward the Dark Star Canyon. Suliu was just about to follow along when Yohu instructed, "You stay here." A displeased look appeared on Suliu's face upon hearing this, but he still obliged in the end, and he turned to take a glance at Han Li as he said, "You've got some tricks up your sleeve, kid. Let's have a fight once you're recovered from your injuries." After that, he flew down toward the battlefield below without waiting for a response. A wry smile appeared on Han Li's face as he promptly swallowed a pill. In the wake of the golden beetle fleeing the battlefield, the insect race army's morale was instantly completely crushed, and Suliu was able to tear through their ranks without equal. Before long, the insect race army had been comprehensively defeated and began to retreat. Deep within the dark Star Canyon, there was a massive waterfall crashing down between two mountains, producing a vast cloud of water vapor that reflected a dazzling rainbow under the light of the sun. The waterfall was gushing into an enormous pool, and waves were rippling incessantly over the surface of the water in the pool. Right at the center of the pool stood a tall and majestic black stone palace, and at this moment, there was a huge lit brazier at the center of the palace, illuminating the entire space. Around the brazier were a series of large chairs, upon which were seated the chiefs of all of the beast race tribes. The chair that was directly opposite the gate of the stone palace was occupied by none other than Newo Yan, and to his left were Ulu and the others, while the chairs on his right were vacant for now. Several other calm dawn beings were standing behind Newo Yan, one of whom was his daughter, Newo Yan. Has there been any news from the Azure Boar, Menace Lion, and Night Owl tribes? When will they be able to get here? Newo Yan asked with a solemn expression. One of the older calm dawn beings stepped forward and reported. The Azure Boar tribe sent word 2 days ago, stating that they'll be here in 3 months, while the Menace Lion and Night Owl tribes will arrive a little later, but they should be here within half a year. Send out some Azure Jade pigeons right away to inform them of what happened today and urge them to get here faster, Newo Yan instructed. Yes, Chief, the calm dawn being replied, then immediately departed to carry out the order. Following his departure, the palace fell silent again, and the atmosphere was a little tense. During the prior battle, the insect spirit had put on an extremely formidable display, and the beast race army had also been clearly at a disadvantage against the insect race army, so even though they had won the battle, morale was still very low. This attack from the insect race was very strange in quite a few ways, and it's already quite commendable that we were able to ward them off on such short notice, so don't be too hard on yourselves. Right now, we need to be on our guard in case they suddenly turn around for a second attack. Once all of our tribes are united, it'll be time for us to retaliate, Newo Yan declared. It wasn't clear if everyone in the palace had actually been encouraged by his words, but they still all gave affirmative responses. Following the departure of the other tribal leaders, the chiefs of the violent bear tribe and the monohorn tribe remained seated with Newo Yan. Where is that human right now? Ulu asked with a hesitant expression. According to the people that I have keeping an eye on him, he's already returned to the cave abode I've arranged for him, Newo Yan replied. His performance during the battle was extraordinary. Even our king wasn't able to force back the insect spirit, yet he was able to do it on his own, and I don't think he's even shown us his full power. How about we give him a more detailed map and get him to leave as soon as possible? The chief of the monohorn tribe proposed. I'm just worried that it won't be so easy to get him to leave, Ulu mused with a concerned expression. I think your concerns are unnecessary. If he truly harbored sinister intentions against our beast race, then he wouldn't have faced off against the insect spirit. Instead, he would have taken the opportunity to turn on us. On top of that, I've already instructed my people to keep a close eye on him, and I'll immediately be informed as soon as he does anything, Newo Yan said. I certainly hope you're right. I just can't shake the feeling that there's something strange about the attack from the insect race. No matter how I look at it, it just doesn't make sense for the insect race to launch such a large-scale attack at a time like this, Ulu said. If I recall correctly, it sounded like the insect spirit was searching for something. The chief of the monohorn tribe mused. I also recall hearing it demanding that we hand something over, Ulu chimed in with furrowed brows. This is the territory of our calm dawn tribe. Regardless of what it's looking for, we won't let it get its way, Newo Yan declared. Chief Newo is right. The honor of our beast race is not to be violated. Once all of our tribes are assembled, we must exact vengeance upon the insect race, Ulu declared. The chief of the monohorn tribe didn't say anything, but he also nodded in agreement. Following the departure of the two chiefs, Newo Kinglin and Newo Yifen were the only ones left in the palace. Father. As soon as Newo Yifen opened her mouth to speak, Newo Kinglin immediately raised a hand to stop her. I know what you want to say. You feel guilty because we're being so wary of someone who's just saved our beast race, right? Newo Kinglin asked. Newo Yifen nodded in response. Humans are even more cunning and vicious than the insect race, so I have no choice but to be on my guard, Newo Kinglin sighed. Wasn't Mother also a human? Clearly, there are good people in all races and tribes, Newo Kinglin argued. A reminiscent look appeared on Newo Kinglin's face upon hearing this, and he replied, Your mother was indeed an exception. Otherwise, I wouldn't have taken her as my wife despite the objections of the entire tribe. However, it was exactly because she was too kind and pure, and that she was killed by her own race. Back when Newo Yifen was still a child, her mother had been killed by human cultivators. Even though Newo Kinglin had gone on to avenge her, his hatred for humans had become very deep-rooted in the wake of that incident. Don't worry, as long as he doesn't harm the interests of our beast race, I won't do anything to him. Instead, once he decides to leave, not only will I give him the maps that I promised, I'll also present him with other gifts to thank him for what he did for us, Newo Kinglin said in a gentle voice as he gently stroked his daughter's hair, and only then did a faint smile appear on Newo Yifen's face. Meanwhile, Han Li was seated with his legs crossed on the stone bed in the inner room of his cave abode, and he was resting with his eyes closed, while his entire body enshrouded within a layer of azure light. Jin Tong was laying on the bed beside him, looking up at him with her eyes wide open. Some time later, Han Li exhaled as he slowly opened his eyes, and Jin Tong immediately asked, How are you feeling, uncle? I'm all right. I just need to take some pills, then rest for a while longer and I'll be perfectly fine, Han Li replied. That's good to hear, Jin Tong said with a relieved expression. How are you feeling? Are you afraid to have such a powerful gold-devouring immortal coming after you? Han Li jibed with a faint smile. When have I ever been afraid of anyone? That thing is just a little stronger than I am. Even if I can't eat it for now, I'll definitely be able to cripple it, and if I can't do that, well, I still have you, don't I? Jin Tong's voice became quieter and quieter as she spoke, and by the end it was nothing more than a whimper. Right now, I'm definitely no match for it. If Yohu hadn't been on that battlefield, we would have been in a great deal of trouble, Han Li sighed. Before we ran into that thing, I only had a vague sense of it, but after being in such close proximity to it, it's already completely locked onto my aura, so we won't be able to get away from it unless we leave the primordial land altogether, Jin Tong said with a dejected expression. Han Li heaved a faint sigh and shook his head upon hearing this. In the face of a gold-devouring immortal that was far more powerful than herself, Jin Tong instinctively wanted to devour them, but she also instinctively feared being devoured herself. Jin Tong tugged on the corner of Han Li's robe in an uneasy manner, hopping to get some reassurance, and Han Li sighed. We're in a pretty bad situation right now. We haven't received the maps of the primordial land from Chief Newo yet, so even if we leave this place, we'll just get lost right away, and even if we do receive the maps, there's no way we'll be able to get out of the primordial land in a short time. What do we do then? Jin Tong asked with a concerned expression. Even though I was able to temporarily seal that thing's nascent soul, given its powers, it won't be long before it manages to undo the seal. The next time it attacks, even if Yohu and I join forces, we still may not be able to defeat it. Prior to that, I have to work harder in my cultivation to see if I can make some more progress, and at the same time, I'll do my best to recover the power of my mantra-treasured axis. That way, we should have some chance of victory, Hanli mused with tightly furrowed brows. I knew you would have a way, uncle, Jin Tong exclaimed as her eyes lit up. What are our chances of victory? I'd say about 10%, Hanli replied. Jiang Tong's face immediately fell upon hearing this. That's terrible. Even then, that's a very optimistic estimate. 10% is already quite high, Hanli said with a wry smile. Jin Tong was silent for a moment, following which a thought suddenly occurred to her as she asked, Uncle, do you have any other treasures like that cauldron from before? If you could get me a few of those to eat. Maybe I'll be able to beat that thing after I take a nap. Those types of treasures are extremely rare. Besides, I didn't even get to examine it before you ate it, so I don't even know what type of treasure it is, Hanli replied with a shake of his head. At this point, Jin Tong was desperate, and she turned to Xiao Bai as she urged, Xiao Bai, try and sniff out some treasures nearby. Xiao Bai merely rolled its eyes in response. Several months later, in a large palace at the foot of the waterfall in the Dark Star Canyon, were dozens of large chairs placed around a bonfire, several of which were currently occupied by foreign beings. While there weren't many of them present, all of them were chiefs of some of the largest tribes in the entire beast race, making them the most powerful figures in the beast race, with the exception of the true spirits. Chief Newo, you made a decision to summon our king on your own without waiting for all of the tribes to assemble. How are you going to explain yourself? A purple-skinned man asked as he turned to Newo Kinglin. What explanation do you require from me, Chief Dengui? What would you have done if the insect spirit had suddenly stormed onto the territory of your night owl tribe with such a formidable army? Newo Kinglin countered. Don't pin the blame on Chief Newo. It was Master Suliu who summoned our king. Ulu chimed in as he took a displeased look at the purple-skinned man. Let's not descend into senseless bickering. There's no way the insect spirit will just give up, so we have to devise a plan for retaliation. This time, it was a white-robed woman with a near-transparent body that had spoken. Her facial features were quite similar to those of a human, and there were faint azure patterns around her eyes, which were extremely large and shimmering with a peculiar, seductive light. Chief Yinmei is right. Let's have a constructive discussion. Chief Newo, I heard that a human played a major role in forcing the insect spirit into retreat. Is that true? A man who resembled a humanoid boar with sharp black spikes all over his body asked. While he had a hideous appearance, he possessed the highest cultivation base out of everyone present, and everyone immediately turned to Newo Kinglin upon hearing this. That's right. He saved my daughter and the Longneck tribe back on Bright Deer Hill, then escorted them back to the Dark Star Canyon, so I allowed him to stay in the canyon, Newo Kinglin explained. Have you gone senile, Chief Newo? I can't believe you would accept another human into your ranks, the purple-skinned man sneered. I've already issued orders for him to be placed under tight surveillance. All he wants are some maps of the primordial land, and once I've compiled them and given them to him, he'll be on his way, Newo Kinglin replied in a cold voice. How was a mid-golden, immortal cultivator able to play such a major role in forcing the insect spirit into retreat? The boar-like man asked with a perplexed expression. Have you considered how much of a coincidence it was that the insect spirit attacked right after he came to the Dark Star Canyon? Perhaps they agreed on this plan in advance to put on an act, and once we're all here in the Dark Star Canyon, the insect spirit will return to wipe us all out. Deng Gui speculated as he raised an eyebrow. His speculation wasn't backed with any evidence, but it immediately sowed a seed of doubt in everyone's hearts, and all of them turned to Newo Kinglin for an answer. He's not just an ordinary mid-golden immortal cultivator. He has a spirit pet that possesses the aura of a primordial true spirit, and there are also many types of true spirit bloodlines in his body. Do you think the insect spirit would be willing to work with a human that possesses beastly true spirit bloodlines? Newo Yan retorted. He possesses true spirit bloodlines, Dengui exclaimed with a surprised expression. I wouldn't have allowed him to set foot in my Dark Star Canyon otherwise, Newo Yan replied with an indifferent expression. What do you think of this, Chief Ziwashi? Yinmei asked as he turned to the boar-like man. If he possesses true spirit bloodlines, then there's no way that he could be working with the insect race. However, there's no way that we can trust a human. If he can be used, then we'll use him, but if he can't, then we have to make him leave as soon as possible, the boar-like man mused. Yinmei nodded as she agreed. Given his powers and his cultivation base, it would be best not to make an enemy out of him. I have no objections, Dengui agreed with a shrug. In that case, hold on a second. An elderly voice interjected before Newo Yan had a chance to finish his sentence. Everyone immediately turned to the chair that was directly facing Ziwashi's, and an elderly man with a head of white hair and wrinkles all over his face leaned forward slightly before standing up from his chair. At first glance he appeared to be no different in appearance for a human, but upon closer inspection, one would discover that there were 8 or 9 fist-sized lion heads growing around his face. While everyone had been in discussion earlier, he had been leaning back against his chair with his eyes closed, looking as if he had fallen asleep and had only just woken up a moment earlier. What do you think, Senior Yin Shen? Newo Yan asked. This man was the previous chief of the Menace Lion tribe, so he was a very senior figure in the beast race. He had already passed down his position to his only son so that he could focus on cultivation, but his son was killed during a conflict with some human primordial hunters. He had immediately stormed out of seclusion in a fit of rage and pursued those human cultivators for millions of kilometers, chasing them all the way to the northern city wall of Primordial Origin City, where he finally slew the final primordial hunter. After that, he had returned with several hundred human heads and piled them all up in front of his son's grave before assuming the role of chief again. As I'm sure you're all aware, the insect spirit's physical prowess and regenerative abilities are even superior to those of our king. Not only was our Dark Star Canyon not prepared for this attack, the insect race also wasn't able to draw upon all of its power on such short notice. Once it makes a recovery and attacks again with the insect race army, our king most likely still won't have recovered from his injuries, so how will we be able to stop it? Yin Shen asked in an expressionless manner. Everyone fell silent upon hearing this. Don't try to build suspense, Chief Yin Shen. If you have a solution, then lay it out for us. The person who had spoken was a wizened elderly woman with a head of white hair. Her ears were extraordinarily large, and her nose was elongated into a trunk. She was comparable to Yin Shen when it came to seniority, and she was the chief of the Divine Elephant tribe. Indeed, Senior Yin Shen, please tell us your plan, Ziwashi also urged. Seeing as that human possesses true spirit bloodlines, I don't think I need to tell all of you how we can maximize his usefulness to us, Yin Shen said as he took a glance at Newo Yan. Dengui's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. You're suggesting that we refine the true spirit bloodlines out of his body to speed up the recovery of our king. We can't do that. He may be a human, but he's helped our beast race on several occasions. We can't repay his kindness with such atrocities, Newo Yan immediately exclaimed with tightly furrowed brows. Have you forgotten how your wife met her demise, Chief Newo? You must be insane if you think humans are deserving of any trust or empathy, Dengui scoffed. We're weighing up the life of a single human and the existence of our entire race here. Surely you know what choice must be made, Chief Newo, Ziwashi said. Our king was only able to force back the insect spirit with his help, So there's no way that our king would agree to this, Newo Yan protested. That's where you're wrong. I wasn't actually sleeping just now. Instead, I was communicating with our king, and he agreed to this plan, Yin Shen said with a smile. Newo Yan was silent for a moment, then sighed. In that case, I have no objections. All right, let's discuss how we're going to trap and kill him. While this discussion was taking place between the tribal leaders, Han Li was seated with his legs crossed on the stone bed in the inner room of his cave abode. His eyes were tightly shut, and there was a layer of azure light swirling around him. Neither Jin Tong nor Xiao Bai were currently with him, and it was unclear whether they had been stowed away. He was still completely oblivious to the sinister plot that the beast race was hatching against him, and he was wholeheartedly focused on preparing for the battle that was to come. Compared with his status as a wanted fugitive of the heavenly court, this situation was an even more difficult one to contend with, and it could be said that this was the biggest crisis that he had faced since coming to the true immortal realm. By some strokes of luck, he had been able to kill a high zenith stage immortal envoy of the heavenly court, but in this case, he was facing a formidable foe that was far more powerful than even Gong Shujiu. Even though the chances of overcoming this ordeal were extremely slim, he naturally wasn't going to just give up. Time slowly passed by, and after a while Han Li opened his eyes, while the azure light swirling around him also faded. He cast an expressionless gaze toward the outer room, then slowly closed his eyes once again. At the same time, a figure was racing through the sky near the valley that Han Li was staying in, and they arrived on the scene as a streak of azure light before drawing to an abrupt halt in midair. It was none other than the white-robed Newo Yan, and he extended a hand forward as he instructed, "Come with me." A slender hand reached out of thin air to remove the hood of a cloak, and Newo Yan suddenly appeared amid a flash of gray light. "Father, Senior Li has shown us nothing but kindness. How can we?" "This is not what I want to see either, but the decision was arrived at by all of our tribes, and I cannot go against it," Newo Yan interjected before she had a chance to finish. "But it's the wrong decision. Father, you've always denounced humans as an honorless and treacherous race, but how are we any different from them with what we're doing right now?" Newo Yan protested with tightly furrowed brows. "This is a decision made by our king. What else can I do?" Newo Yan sighed. A disappointed look appeared on Newo Yan's face upon hearing this, and she fell silent as she turned to look at the mountain face in the distance. At this point, all of the Calm Dawn beings within a radius of several hundred kilometers had already been evacuated, and the entire area had been surrounded by an elite army of several thousand beast race warriors, led by dozens of grand elders from various tribes. All of the chiefs of the 8 holy tribes aside from Newo Yan were also all hovering in the sky above the mountain face, staring intently at Han Li's cave abode. Chief Yin Shen of the Menace Lion tribe swept a hand through the air, and a small yellow flag appeared in his grasp before he waved it at the dozens of grand elders in the distance. The grand elders raised the bone staves in their hands in unison upon seeing this, and they also began to chant a strange incantation. As soon as their incantation rang out, the river that was flowing through the Dark Star Canyon instantly became extremely violent and turbulent, while bursts of azure and purple light emerged from the vines draped over the nearby mountain faces, forming a series of fox head totems. As these fox heads emerged, the canyon suddenly began to turn dark, and before long it was as if day had transitioned into night. At the same time, specks of starlight rose up from all directions, forming a radiant river of starlight that descended straight down from the night sky, filling the entire canyon with a strange and profound power. As the chanting from the grand elders continued, all of the thousands of elite beast race warriors began performing what appeared to be a ceremonial dance. Before long, streaks of light had converged to form a massive restrictive formation around the mountain face, completely surrounding the entire mountain face and the cave abode upon it. Please come out, fellow Taoist Li. The tribes of our beast race have something to discuss with you, Yin Shen declared in a thunderous voice, and his voice was echoing incessantly within the canyon. There was no response. Please come out to see us, fellow Taoist Li, Yin Shen repeated. He could clearly sense that Han Li's aura was still in the cave abode, so he wasn't worried that Han Li had snuck away. Many of the beast race warriors present had witnessed Han Li's battle against the insect spirit, so even though they didn't want to admit it, deep down, they were quite fearful of Han Li. Not only was that the case for them, even the likes of Ulu and Newo Yan were extremely wary of him, but they had no choice but to do this for the survival of their race. After calling out for a third time, all of the beast race warriors present finally began to develop a sense that something wasn't quite right. Is there something wrong? Ulu asked with tightly furrowed brows, while the other chiefs were just as perplexed. He's just playing mind games with us. I'll force him to come out. Deng Gui of the Night Owl tribe harumphed coldly, then swooped down toward the mountain face like a bird of prey. However, before he was able to descend upon the cave abode, a resounding boom suddenly rang out from the mountain face, and the cave abode abruptly exploded violently, sending powerful shockwaves sweeping through the air in all directions. Deng Gui's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and he hurriedly flew back in retreat, hovering in midair a safe distance away from the mountain face. All of the other beast race warriors also began staring at the mountain face with apprehensive looks on their faces. From the wreckage of the cave abode emerged an azure-robed man, who looked up at the beast race chiefs with a calm and composed expression. Aside from a few of the chiefs present, none of them dared to meet his gaze. It was as if the proud beast race had lowered its head in the face of a human. Among these few chiefs were Yin Shen, Newo Yan, and the chief of the divine elephant tribe. At this moment, Newo Yan was looking at Han Li with a complex combination of sympathy, apology, and resignation in his eyes. Meanwhile, Han Li remained silent and composed, and he refrained from releasing his mid-golden immortal stage aura. Even so, there was still a sense of immense pressure emanating from his body, and all of the beast race warriors were becoming more and more uneasy by the second. The entire area had descended into a strange silence, but right at this moment, Yin Shen roared, "Attack!" As soon as this order was issued, all of the Grand Elders immediately began waving their bone staves through the air while chanting an incantation, and blood began to flow out of the palms of their hand before trickling down onto their bone staves, staining them a bright red. At the same time, a giant true spirit projection began to emerge above the formation that surrounded the entire mountain face, and it was gradually taking on a more and more substantial appearance. Bursts of tremendous pressure also came crashing down from the sky, striking all of the beast race warriors present with a sense of asphyxiation. Before long, the first true spirit descended upon the mountain face. It was none other than the armor-clad six-tailed fox, Suliu. Immediately after him came a giant rhinoceros, the size of a mountain, and a huge falcon, with feathers that resembled dark metal. Bursts of tremendous energy fluctuations surged through the air, as all 8 of the true spirits revered by the beast race emerged one after another, and all of them were glowering at the azure-robed man down below. Even in the face of the 8 true spirits, Han Li continued to stand in silence with his hands clasped behind his back. Suliu stared at Han Li for a moment longer, following which his brows suddenly furrowed slightly, and he swooped down from above with tremendous force before swinging one of his tails at Han Li. A resounding boom rang out as the entire mountain face collapsed, and Han Li was buried beneath the rubble. Everyone else was quite dumbfounded to see this, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. "You idiots! He's already run away long ago," Suliu exclaimed as he turned to all of the tribal leaders present with a furious expression. As he lifted his tail, Han Li was nowhere to be seen. Instead, all that remained in his place was a dark yellow bean and an azure horse mask, both of which were glowing faintly amid the wreckage. Shortly thereafter, the bean fell dark after exhausting the final hint of spiritual energy within it. Newo Yan arrived on the scene, and Yin Shen turned to him as he asked, "How did this happen? How was that human tipped off in advance?" A hint of fury welled up in Newo Yan's heart at Yin Shen's accusatory tone, and he asked in a furious voice, "How would I know? Are you suspecting me? I heard that your daughter was quite close with that human," Deng Gui mused in a suggestive manner. "Shut your mouth," Newo Yan snapped. "Yifen has been sealed in her room ever since we decided on this plan." Suliu also turned to Deng Gui with a menacing expression as he asked, "What did you say about Yifen?" Deng Gui immediately lowered his head upon hearing this, not daring to say anything further. Suliu wasn't particularly powerful among all of the true spirits worshipped by the beast race, but he was the son of the king of the true spirits, Yohu, so it was certainly not a good idea for anyone in the beast race to get on his bad side. Ulu and Marlon exchanged a glance with each other, and each of them could see their own schadenfreude mirrored in one another's eyes. Everyone knew that Suliu was extremely fond of Yifen, yet it seemed that Deng Gui had a death wish. One of the main reasons why the Calm Dawn tribe was one of the 8 holy tribes was because the true spirit that they worshipped was Suliu, and the other important factor was how fond Suliu was of Newo Yifen. The Black Hawk was the true spirit revered by the Night Owl tribe, and it also gave Deng Gui a cold, reprimanding glare. Sweat immediately began to bead up on Deng Gui's forehead as he fell into a fearful silence. "Don't go around blaming women all the time for your own incompetence," Suliu scoffed, then gradually faded away into nothingness. As for the other true spirits, they chatted briefly with one another, then departed as well. In the sky above the rubble that used to be the mountain face, the members of the 8 holy tribes were all looking on with tightly furrowed brows. Several thousand feet away, Newo Yifen was also observing what was happening in the distance while concealed in her gray cloak, and she was very relieved by what she saw. On a lone peak that was tens of thousands of kilometers away from the Dark Star Canyon, Han Li was seated with his legs crossed under an enormous tree. His eyes were closed, and his entire body was enshrouded within a layer of golden light. Right at this moment, his eyes suddenly sprang open as a mocking sneer appeared on his face. "Why are you smiling like that, uncle?" Jin Tong asked with a perplexed expression. "The beast race has decided to attack me," Han Li replied. A hint of disappointment appeared on Jin Tong's face upon hearing this, and she turned with tightly furrowed brows to face Xiao Bai, who was grinning from ear to ear. In the face of Jin Tong's cold glare, Xiao Bai hurriedly wiped the smile from its own face as it said in a careful manner, "I win the bet this time, so." Jin Tong harumphed coldly, as she raised a hand to toss a crystal that was brimming with spiritual chi toward Xiao Bai. "These beast race bastards are nothing more than a bunch of ungrateful dogs," she cursed in a furious voice, making sure to put heavy emphasis on the words ungrateful dogs, and Xiao Bai was just about to swallow the crystal, but he almost choked on it upon hearing this. All of a sudden, it was beginning to regret making a bet against Jin Tong on whether the beast race would target Han Li. "I possess several true spirit bloodlines, and I'm accompanied by a Pixiu that's yet to reach full maturity, both of which will be immensely beneficial for their king's recovery. On top of that, they resent humans no less than they do the insect race, so it would have been very unwise to stay there," Han Li said with a smile. Your wisdom and foresight are truly astounding, Xiao Bai praised after swallowing the crystal. Since when did you become such a suck-up, Xiao Bai? Jin Tong asked as she raised an eyebrow. Ever since I began following Master, my life has really taken a turn for the better. Not only do I have treasures to eat every day, I also get to enjoy the protection of someone as brave and powerful as yourself. This is something that I wouldn't even have dared to imagine in the past, Xiao Bai replied while putting on an earnest facade. Jin Tong was very satisfied with this response, and she nodded with a pleased expression. I can definitely agree with that. By the way, that substitution method that you used was incredible, Master. With that Tao warrior dressed in your clothes and disguised with that mask, as well as the substitution talisman in its body, it would have been enough to fool anyone, Xiao Bai praised. All right, stop trying to flatter me. Now that we've left the beast race, we'll no longer be able to use their true spirits to deal with that gold-devouring immortal, so we're in an even worse situation than before, Hanley said as he rose to his feet. Uncle, I can sense that that thing is slowly recovering its power, Jin Tong said in a concerned voice. I didn't refine the origin separation law chains myself, so I definitely wouldn't have been able to use them as effectively as Feng Tiandu. On top of that, given how powerful the gold-devouring immortal is, we can't expect the chains to seal it for long, so I'm sure it'll come after us again before too long, Hanley sighed. What should we do then? Jin Tong hurriedly asked in an urgent voice. At this point, we've already received some maps of the beast race's territory, so we'll just have to take things one step at a time. If we can buy enough time for me to recover all of my Time Dao runes, then we'll have some chances of taking it by surprise and severely wounding it before fleeing the primordial land, Hanley replied. Jin Tong nodded in response, then asked, Where do we go now? Hanley didn't immediately reply. Instead, he flipped a hand over to produce a map, then examined it for a moment before musing. According to the map, the area inhabited by the beast race and the insect race is still only on the outskirts of the primordial land, so we'll be getting deeper into the primordial land if we travel southward. In any case, let's get out of this area as quickly as possible. After that, he swept a sleeve through the air to summon the green jade flying carriage, and after the three of them had all flown onto the carriage, it set off as a streak of green light. Close to half a day later, Han Li was standing at the front of the carriage. An immortal spiritual power was flowing incessantly into the carriage from the bottom of his feet to support its flight. The spiritual patterns on the flying carriage were flashing incessantly, releasing strands of green spiritual light that formed a light barrier around the carriage. The carriage was flying so quickly that the surrounding scenery had become very blurry and impossible to discern. But at this moment, Han Li's brows remained tightly furrowed. While the carriage was flying at an incredible speed, he knew that this was far from its limit. In fact, he had most likely only unleashed 20% to 30% of its power. The former owner of this treasure was a high zenith stage jade immortal, so it only made sense that a mid-golden immortal cultivator like him wouldn't be able to unleash its full power. This level of speed was sufficient for normal purposes, but it was rather lacking given the current circumstances. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Han Li, and he raised a hand to summon Taoist Zai amid a flash of golden lightning. Pilot the carriage for me, Han Li instructed, then took a few steps backward before sitting down. Taoist Zai's immortal spiritual power was far inferior to Han Li's, and after it took over from him, the spiritual light radiating from the carriage instantly dimmed a little, while its speed was also noticeably reduced. Han Li paid no heed to this as he flipped a hand over to summon his Dragon 5 mask before putting it on, then conjured up a crimson light screen in front of himself. Aside from the additional earthly list included on the crimson light screen, It was no different from the screens of light conjured up using other transient guild masks. From there, Han Li released a mission, searching for a way for golden immortal cultivators to use high zenith stage immortal treasures, and he was offering quite a handsome reward. After that, he turned his gaze to the exchange section on the light screen before carefully combing through it. Moments later, a stack of yellow formation tools, a white umbrella immortal treasure, and a green jade lock appeared on the ground beside him, all of which were giving off formidable spiritual power fluctuations. Jin Tong's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of these treasures, but it was clear that they were useful to Han Li, so she could only suppress her own desires and wrench her gaze away from the treasures. Close to a day quickly flew by. The crimson light screen rippled momentarily before fading away, following which Han Li removed his mask before stowing it away. Jin Tong immediately approached him while riding atop Xiao Bai, then asked with a curious expression, "You spent a lot of immortal origin stones, uncle. What did you end up buying?" "Those things are all useful to me, so I can't let you eat them," Han Li replied as he swept a sleeve through the air, stowing away all of the items laid out on the ground in front of him. A displeased pout appeared on Jin Tong's face. "Can you sense anything from that gold-devouring immortal?" Han Li asked. A grim look immediately appeared in Jin Tong's eyes as she replied, "It seems to be recovering its power at a faster rate than before, but the good news is that it still hasn't come after us yet." "How long can you stay in Xiao Bai's stomach for?" Han Li asked with a solemn expression. "There's a special type of power in the internal space in Xiao Bai's stomach, and even though it can't digest my body, it does affect my soul, so I can only stay in there for an hour at a time at most before having to come back out," Jin Tong replied as she patted Xiao Bai on the head. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this. While inside Xiao Bai's internal space, Jin Tong was able to escape the detection of the gold-devouring immortal, and that was very useful, but an hour was simply too short a time frame to make a substantial difference. Essentially, this meant that the gold-devouring immortal would be able to lock onto them once every hour. "Is there any way for you to extend the duration that Jin Tong can remain in your body?" Han Li asked as he turned to Xiao Bai. "My internal space is an innate ability of our Pixiu tribe, but unfortunately, I still haven't reached full maturity yet, so I'm unable to completely control everything within this space. An hour is already the best that I can do. If we want to extend that duration, then we'll have to think of something else," Xiao Bai replied with a shake of its head. "In that case, as long as we can fortify your soul, you should be able to stay longer in Xiao Bai's body. That's something that's easily achievable," Han Li said as he summoned his reincarnation palace mask before putting it on again, and the crimson light screen was conjured up a second time. He turned to the exchange section once again, and after some searching, he quickly spotted what he was looking for. "Soul Armor Talisman, what's that?" Jin Tong asked with a curious expression. "Give it a try, it might be useful for you," Han Li replied with a faint smile. In order to deal with the backlash from the spirit refinement technique, Han Li had searched extensively for items that had effects on one's soul, and during his search, he had seen these soul armor talismans. As the name suggested, this was a special talisman that could enhance the defenses of the soul. It was very effective, but also extremely expensive, costing 500 immortal origin stones per talisman, and each one could only last a short time. Han Li immediately purchased one such talisman, and it quickly emerged before him in a teleportation formation amid a flash of white light. There were some cloud designs etched onto the talisman's surface, and it was giving off a peculiar aura alongside a burst of formidable spiritual power fluctuations. "Jin Tong, give this a try to see if you can stay in Xiao Bai's body for a bit longer," Han Li said as he handed the talisman to Jin Tong. Jin Tong accepted the talisman before adhering it to her own body, and it immediately vanished into her body as a ball of gentle white light. A series of radiant white spirit patterns then appeared on her forehead, forming the same cloud-like designs that had been on the talisman. A peculiar look appeared on Jin Tong's face, following which she instructed Xiao Bai to open its mouth before flying toward it as a streak of golden light. Xiao Bai hurriedly obliged, swallowing the streak of golden light. An hour quickly flew by, but Jin Tong still hadn't come out, and Xiao Bai was growing a little anxious, packing around the carriage in a concerned fashion. Han Li was very encouraged to see this, and he continued to wait. Another hour passed by before Xiao Bai's expression suddenly changed slightly, and it opened its mouth, upon which Jin Tong flew out as a streak of golden light. The white spirit patterns on her forehead had already vanished, and her complexion was looking a little pale. Han Li didn't immediately ask how she felt. Instead, he flipped a hand over to produce a green jade ruler before handing it to her. Jin Tong immediately grabbed onto the ruler, then quickly crunched it down in just a few bites, as if she were eating a stick of hard candy. After that, a layer of azure light emerged over her face before quickly fading away, but her complexion was left looking a little better. "How did it go?" Han Li asked. "The talisman worked, uncle. Before I had the talisman, I always felt really drowsy while inside Xiao Bai's stomach, but the talisman made me feel a lot better," Jin Tong replied with a smile. "How much longer do you think you'll be able to stay in there if you had enough of these talismans at your disposal?" Han Li asked. "Even with enough talismans, I feel like I'll only be able to stay another hour in there at most," Jin Tong replied. Han Li gave a contemplative nod upon hearing this. It seemed that even with these soul armor talismans enhancing her soul, she couldn't stay in Xiao Bai's stomach for very long. At the very most, she would only be able to stay in there for 3 hours at a time at the cost of 2 of these talismans. This wasn't a very long time, but it was already far better than before. With that in mind, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to produce several more spirit treasures for Jin Tong to eat, then returned to the exchange section in the Reincarnation Palace interface to purchase over 100 soul armor talismans. This was a dire situation, so he wasn't being stingy with his immortal origin stones at all. Right as he was about to withdraw the crimson light barrier, an elated look suddenly appeared on his face. As it turned out, someone had already responded to the mission that he had just released. He immediately cast an incantation seal onto the light screen, and a burst of red light emerged from within, then transformed into a blurry red figure with indistinguishable facial features. However, the words Phoenix 19 could be clearly seen etched on the figure's mask. "Given that you've responded to this mission, I presume you must have a way for golden immortals to use high zenith stage immortal treasures, right, fellow Taoist?" Han Li said, wasting no time with small talk. "Before I answer that question, I want to ask what type of immortal treasure you wish to use," Phoenix 19 replied. The voice sounded like it belonged to a man, but it was surprisingly a little high-pitched. "A flying immortal treasure," Han Li replied. "I see. Generally speaking, the immortal spiritual power requirements of flying immortal treasures aren't very high, so this will be a relatively easy case. Having said that, I'll need you to tell me about the restrictions in the treasure," Phoenix 19 said. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, but he offered no response. "Are you under the impression that I'm trying to glean the secrets of your immortal treasure? The problem is that if I'm not aware of the restrictions in the flying treasure, then I can't decide on the best way to use it," Phoenix 19 said. Han Li continued to stare at Phoenix 19 in silence. The flying carriage had once belonged to Gongshu Jiu, and the heavenly court had members all over the entire true immortal realm. So he had to be extremely careful not to expose himself as Gong Shujiu's killer. However, Phoenix 19 was also telling the truth. After some contemplation, Han Li ultimately decided to give Phoenix 19 a rough description, the restrictions in the flying carriage. After hearing what Han Li had to say, Phoenix 19 replied, "You found yourself a truly exceptional flying treasure, fellow Taoist. The restrictions used are quite advanced, but thankfully, they're right in my wheelhouse. There are 3 ways that can allow you to tap into over 80% of the carriage's power, but each of them have their own pros and cons." Han Li was quite encouraged to hear this, and he urged, "Please enlighten me, fellow Taoist." "Well, all 3 of those methods are closely guarded secrets, and the compensation you're offering is a little insufficient," Phoenix 19 chuckled. "Rest assured, if the methods that you lay out are truly effective, then I'm happy to compensate you accordingly, but if you're only bluffing." Han Li's voice trailed off there, but the implications were very apparent. Phoenix 19 seemed to have been slightly irked by Han Li's skepticism, and they said in a cold voice, "Don't look down on me, fellow Taoist. All of my methods are secret techniques passed down from 100 Creations Mountain, so you can rest assured of their efficacy." Han Li's heart stirred slightly upon hearing the term, 100 Creations Mountain. This was something that he had heard the Stembora Queen mention while back in the spirit realm. It was a sect in the immortal realm, and the 100 Meridian Refinement mantra that he had cultivated in the past was also a secret technique from 100 Creations Mountain. 1 https://a record of Immortal's journey to immortality, fandom.com/wiki/100 Meridian Refinement mantra #tilde. Text equals 100% 20 meridian percent 20 refinement percent 20 mantra percent 20 was a percent 20 Buddhist percent 20 impervious percent 20 Vajra percent 20 body /ref. Judging from what Phoenix 19 had just said, it seemed like this 100 Creations Mountain was no ordinary sect. Phoenix 19 seemed to have realized that he had lost his composure a little, and he cleared his throat before continuing. "These are the 3 methods and the compensation that I require. As for exactly which one you choose, that'll be up to you." After that, he swept a sleeve through the air to release 3 specks of light, which swelled to form 3 light screens in midair, all of which were filled with tiny text. Han Li cast his gaze toward the first light screen to discover that it contained a special secret technique that could forcibly stimulate the spiritual power within the flying carriage to make up for the subpar immortal spirit power of a golden immortal, and this method could tap into over 90% of the carriage's power. At the end, a price tag of 5,000 immortal origin stones was displayed. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he turned his gaze to the next light screen. According to the first light screen, the enclosed method didn't require much preparation, and it could be used as long as one knew the secret technique, but it was very harmful to the flying carriage, and it wouldn't take long before the carriage's spiritual power was completely exhausted. This would be a suitable method to use on a short-term basis, but he was going to have to rely on the flying carriage on this entire journey through the primordial land, so it clearly wasn't going to work. As Han Li read through the content of the second light barrier, his eyes began to light up a little. The second light screen contained an alternative secret technique that could temporarily fuse the immortal spiritual power of several golden immortals into one to reach the high zenith stage, and this was also the most effective of the 3 methods, able to tap into virtually all of the flying carriage's power. The price tag for this method was 10,000 immortal origin stones. However, Han Li quickly realized that this was an unfeasible method, not because of the steep price, but instead because the minimum personnel requirement to unleash this secret technique was a lineup of at least 3 late golden immortal cultivators or at least 8 mid-golden immortal cultivators. The lineup of Han Li, Taoist Zai, Xiao Bai, and Jin Tong was still far from reaching this minimum requirement. By his estimates, they would only be able to tap into around 60% of the carriage's power using this secret technique, which was an improvement for sure, but still far from ideal. With that in mind, Han Li heard an internal sigh before turning his attention to the third light screen, which laid out an array-based secret technique that was similar in principle to the second method, also involving combining multiple sources of immortal spiritual power into one to elevate the combined immortal spiritual power to the high zenith stage. However, this formation drew upon the immortal spiritual power of the immortal origin stones rather than cultivators, and as long as one had sufficient immortal origin stones, they could theoretically tap into the flying carriage's full power. Of course, the number of immortal origin stones required to sustain high zenith stage immortal spiritual power was downright astronomical, and it was far too steep a price for most golden immortals. Perhaps it was because of this that the third method only had a price tag of 1,000 immortal origin stones. It was clear that Phoenix 19 didn't recommend this method, and he had only included it to highlight the first two methods as superior options. "Have you made your decision yet, fellow Taoist?" Phoenix 19 asked. "I have. I'll take the third method," Han Li replied. Phoenix 19 was very much taken aback to hear this. The third method was the cheapest of the three, but its flaws were very apparent. It seemed to Phoenix 19 that Han Li was quite a prudent character, so it was very surprising to him that Han Li had chosen this method. "Are you sure, fellow Taoist?" Phoenix 19 asked. "I am," Han Li replied with a nod. Phoenix 19 didn't ask any further questions, and the exchange quickly took place. Moments later, a white jade slip emerged from the teleportation formation at the center of the crimson light screen. Han Li immediately grabbed the jade slip before injecting his spiritual sense into it, and only after a full hour had passed did he withdraw his spiritual sense, upon which a hint of admiration appeared on his face. The secret technique laid out in the jade slip was definitely a viable one, and it was also perfectly catered to Han Li's flying carriage, indicating that it had been modified by Phoenix 19 to suit this particular case. The fact that he was able to do this in such a short time indicated that his expertise in this field far exceeded Han Li's. With that in mind, Han Li made sure to keep a mental note of Phoenix 19's name, so that he could seek him out if he had encountered any other problems in this field in the future. After that, he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a bunch of materials required to set up the formation before getting to work. Han Li busied himself for 3 days and 3 nights, constructing a hexagonal formation at the center of the flying carriage. The formation wasn't overly complex, but all of the lines and runes intertwining with one another on its surface were still enough to strike the beholder with a sense of disorientation. On each node of the hexagonal formation was a hole about the same thickness of a thumb, and there were dozens of these holes littered throughout the entire formation. Han Li swept his gaze over the formation momentarily, then took a deep breath before pulling out a series of immortal origin stones and slotting them into these holes. After that, he swept a sleeve through the air to release an incantation seal, and the entire formation instantly lit up amid a faint buzzing sound. The immortal origin stones embedded into the formation began to tremble slightly while releasing bursts of spiritual light, which flowed through the lines on the formation like blood before converging to a connective point at the center of the formation. A ball of radiant white light that was giving off astonishing spiritual power fluctuations emerged over that point on the formation, and these spiritual power fluctuations were at the high zenith stage. Han Li finally heaved a sigh of relief upon seeing this. The formation fully lived up to the description that Phoenix 19 had provided, and it was worth all of the resources and effort that he had poured into it. However, as expected, it was burning through immortal spiritual power at an extraordinary rate, and Han Li could sense the immortal spiritual power in the immortal origin stones in the formation rapidly seeping away. It was clear that this set of several dozen immortal origin stones wasn't going to be able to last very long. Unfortunately, there were no other feasible options available to Han Li, and he stowed Taoist Zai away before chanting an incantation while making a hand seal. The ball of white light at the center of the formation instantly began to elongate, transforming into a pillar of white light that infused itself into the flying carriage. The spirit patterns on the flying carriage immediately began to glow several times more radiantly than they had back when Han Li was piloting the carriage, and the green light barrier around the carriage also began to churn violently before transforming into a radiant green cloud. The speed of the flying carriage was enhanced by severalfold, and it lurched forward at a terrifying speed while trembling uncontrollably. This was because the flying carriage was traveling so quickly that Han Li was no longer able to fully control it. The abrupt onset of turbulence gave both Jin Tong and Zio Bai a huge fright, and they were snapped awake from their naps before hurriedly stabilizing themselves for fear of being thrown off the carriage. Han Li wore a solemn expression as he made a rapid string of hand seals, doing everything in his power to control the flying carriage. As time slowly passed, he gradually grew accustomed to the carriage's newfound speed, and only then did he relax a little. The speed of the flying carriage had instilled him with some confidence that they would be able to escape from the gold-devouring immortal that was pursuing them. Jin Tong, from now on, stay in Zio Bai's stomach as much as possible to minimize the duration that the gold-devouring beetle can detect you. As for the soul armor talismans, save those for when we encounter some real danger, Han Li instructed. Jin Tong was aware of the gravity of the situation, so she obediently obliged without raising a fuss, flying into Zio Bai's mouth as a streak of golden light. Meanwhile, Han Li sat down with his legs crossed, piloting the flying carriage with a contemplative look on his face. Even though Jin Tong now had the resources to remain in Zio Bai's stomach for a longer duration of time, and the flying carriage's speed had also been greatly enhanced, he was still feeling very concerned at the prospect of having to face a late-high zenith stage gold-devouring immortal. The only way he could ensure that they would be able to survive this ordeal would be if he could also become a jade immortal, but that was clearly impossible. Even though he had a huge supply of all types of pills, it was virtually impossible to even reach the late golden immortal stage in a short time, let alone the high zenith stage. With that in mind, Han Li's brows became tightly furrowed with concern. However, a thought then suddenly occurred to him, and he flipped a hand over to produce a green gourd amid a flash of green light. It was the profound heavenly treasure that he had taken from Kling. After leaving the infernal frost immortal manor, he had constantly been busy with various affairs, and he had almost forgotten about this treasure. He looked at the green gourd in his hand for a moment, then swept a sleeve through the air to release a series of streaks of azure light, which revealed themselves to be a set of formation flags that landed near Zio Bai. An azure light barrier then abruptly appeared, encompassing the startled Zio Bai within it. Immediately thereafter, Han Li raised his hand, and the green gourd immediately rose up to hover in midair while giving off bursts of gentle green light. Han Li injected his spiritual sense into the green space within the gourd, and it was no different from how it had been in the past. The green space was still filled with green light that was slowly revolving to form a massive green vortex, at the center of which was a small azure sword and a miniature 3-story pavilion. These were the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword, and the pavilion immortal treasure that he had placed in the gourd to test out its powers. At this moment, the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword in the vortex was releasing waves of gentle azure light, and the enormous spiritual power within it had become far purer and more restrained, as was the case with the miniature pavilion treasure. Some time later, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the gourd as a contemplative look appeared on his face. Given how the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword and the pavilion treasure were both still unharmed after spending so much time in the gourd, it was clear that immortal treasures could be stored in the gourd without any problems. With that in mind, Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, summoning 3 azure bamboo cloud swarm swords while pointing a finger at the gourd. A burst of green light flashed over the surface of the gourd, and it released a streak of green light out of its opening to sweep up the 3 flying swords before sucking them in. He repeated this process over and over again, sending his other azure bamboo cloud swarm swords into the gourd in batches, then placed the gourd down onto the ground in front of him. Enhancing his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords wasn't actually the primary reason behind why he had summoned the gourd. As a profound heavenly treasure, this gourd was one of his most precious treasures, second only to his heaven-controlling vial. Even though it didn't seem to be an offensive, profound heavenly treasure, it would surely still be a great help against the gold-devouring immortal if he could fully refine it. With that in mind, Han Li turned his gaze to the opening of the gourd to discover that the coloration of the gourd there was slightly lighter than tea was elsewhere, indicating that it had been picked prior to reaching full maturity. After a brief moment of contemplation, he pulled out his heaven-controlling vial, and there was a drop of faintly glowing green liquid rolling around inside. Han Li gently tipped the vial forward, and the drop of green liquid immediately flowed onto the opening of the gourd, where the lighter coloration was. In the next instant, the green light radiating from the gourd abruptly brightened by severalfold, and countless green runes emerged within the light before dancing and churning violently like boiling water. A burst of formidable law power fluctuations erupted out of the gourd before spreading outward, and the nearby world's origin chi was also stirred up into a frenzy, forming balls of spiritual light of different colors. At the moment, the flying carriage was still racing along, and these balls of spiritual light were instantly left behind, forming a dazzling wave of rainbow light behind the carriage. Han Li paid no heed to this as he stared intently at the gourd. The drop of green liquid quivered momentarily on the surface of the gourd, then slowly seeped into it, following which the churning runes around the gourd slowly subsided. He carefully inspected the gourd to find that its outward appearance hadn't changed at all, nor had any changes taken place within its internal space. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, but he wasn't overly disheartened. Back when he infused his profound heavenly spirit/sword with the green spirit liquid, it had taken a very long time for the effects to manifest themselves, so he had to be patient. With that in mind, Han Li rose to his feet and made his way over to a corner of the flying carriage, where he set up a miniature formation before placing the heaven-controlling vial into it. After that, he returned to his original spot and sat back down, then opened his mouth to release a burst of azure light, which swept up the green gourd before sucking it back into his body. A month passed by in a flash. Under the starry night sky, the green flying carriage was racing along like a green shooting star, continuing to travel at an extraordinary speed. Down below was a vast mountain range, and at this point they were already far away from the dark Star Canyon. Han Li was currently looking down at the mountain range below with tightly furrowed brows. Over the past month, he had constantly been keeping tabs on the high zenith stage gold devouring Immortal through Jin Tong, and according to Jin Tong, It had been rapidly recovering its power of late, indicating that it had most likely already freed itself from the origin separation law chains. Han Li took a glance up at the sky, then strode over the corner of the flying carriage before picking up the heaven-controlling vial and dripping the drop of green liquid inside onto the green gourd. The green gourd began to glow brightly once again while releasing bursts of formidable law power fluctuations. But just like last time, the gourd returned to normal shortly thereafter. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, and he was just about to set the heaven-controlling vial down onto its original spot when he suddenly raised an eyebrow, then stowed the vial away before rushing over to Xiao Bai. There was a concerned look on Xiao Bai's face as it said, "Master, Jin Tong says." "Is it coming after us?" Han Li asked in a grim voice. "Yes, according to Jin Tong, it's coming after us at an even faster speed than our carriage is currently traveling at," Xiao Bai replied. "Faster by how much?" Han Li asked. Xiao Bai was silent for a moment, then replied with a fearful expression, "About twice as fast." Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon hearing this, and he flipped a hand over to produce the soul armor talismans that he had purchased earlier, then tossed all of them into Xiao Bai's mouth as he instructed, "Jin Tong, stay in there for as long as you can." After that, he turned and began casting a string of incantation seals into the flying carriage and the hexagonal formation on the ground. The flying carriage immediately began to glow even brighter as it abruptly swiveled around and set off in a different direction. Meanwhile, countless kilometers behind Han Li, a ball of radiant golden light that was around an acre in size was racing through the air at an extraordinary speed amid a deafening rumbling noise. Encompassed within the ball of golden light was an enormous golden beetle that was flapping its wings with all its might. This was none other than the high zenith stage gold devouring Immortal, and at this moment there was a hint of surprise on its face. It could sense that its target was only at the golden Immortal stage. But they were extremely fast. Granted, it was still faster, but its target was somehow traveling at speed superior even to what the average high zenith stage true spirit was capable of reaching. Immediately thereafter, it stopped cold in its tracks as a perplexed look appeared on its face. All of a sudden, it was no longer able to sense its target anymore. This was the exact same thing that had happened last time back at the Dark Star Canyon, and while it had been recovering from its injuries, there were also several occasions where its target's aura had disappeared, just like what had happened just now. After a brief moment of contemplation, it continued to travel in the same direction as before. Around 3 hours later, its target's aura reappeared, but this time it was in another direction, and it was quite a bit further away. The high zenith stage gold devouring Immortal gave a cold harumph upon sensing this, but it wasn't overly concerned as it turned to set off in that direction. In the sky above a mountain range, the green flying carriage was racing along. Jin Tong seemed to have just come out of Xiao Bai's body, and her complexion was quite pale, while her breathing was also a little ragged. As for Xiao Bai, it was hanging its head in a glum fashion. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly at the sight of Jin Tong's terrible condition, and he swept a sleeve through the air to release a pile of spirit treasures, all of which seemed to be of quite a high caliber. Jin Tong sat down on the flying carriage in silence, then picked up a spirit treasure before stuffing it into her mouth. Xiao Bai really wanted to join in on the feast as well, but it knew that Jin Tong needed the sustenance more than right now, so it suppressed its appetite and laid down onto the carriage. Right at this moment, a golden storage ring fell onto the ground in front of it, and Han Li's voice rang out beside its ears. "Xiao Bai, you have something to eat as well." "Thank you, Master." Xiao Bai immediately rose up onto its haunches before gulping down the storage bracelet, while Han Li sat down with his legs crossed once again to focus on piloting the carriage. Now that Jin Tong was no longer concealed, he didn't bother to change directions and merely continued onward at full speed. Over 2 hours later, Jin Tong rose to her feet, and her complexion had already completely recovered at this point. Han Li immediately instructed Jin Tong to hide in Xiao Bai's stomach once again, before changing directions a second time. The high zenith stage gold-devouring Immortal was furious to discover that its target's aura had disappeared again. Whenever this happened, its target would be able to open up some distance between them, and that was naturally very frustrating to the gold-devouring Immortal, but it had no choice but to keep going. 3 hours later, Jin Tong's aura reappeared, and sure enough, she had changed directions and was once again very far away, ensuring that she was constantly out of reach. However, the gold-devouring Immortal had already calmed down at this point. It had become apparent to it that its target was somehow able to periodically conceal their aura at set intervals, but as long as its target couldn't do this for extended periods of time, they would never be able to get out of its sensory range. Sure enough, over the next few months, the gold-devouring Immortal was still unable to catch its target, but nor was its target able to shake it off their trail. Just like before, its target's aura would periodically disappear, and by the time it re-emerged, it would be in another direction, quite far away. As a result, even though the gold-devouring Immortal was far faster than its target, it was being led on a wild goose chase, rendering it completely passive, which was naturally very infuriating, but there wasn't anything that it could do. The green flying carriage was racing through the sky above a lush forest, and Han Li was looking a little more relaxed as he piloted the carriage. As long as he could maintain the status quo, the gold-devouring Immortal wouldn't be able to catch them, even though this was very taxing on his immortal origin stone reserves. Fortunately, he was extremely wealthy at this point, and theoretically he could keep this up for about 3 more decades. In his mind, surely the gold-devouring Immortal was bound to give up at some point. The only problem was that, as they ventured deeper into the primordial land, everything was very unfamiliar to them, and they had already been attacked by primordial beasts on countless occasions. Even though they had managed to weather all of those storms, this was clearly not a sustainable strategy. The deeper they ventured into the primordial land, the more at risk they would be. At this moment, Jin Tong was crunching on a spirit treasure, while Xiao Bai was resting off the side with its eyes closed. Right at this moment, a hideous screeching sound rang out from the dense forest down below, and just that sound alone was enough to send a burst of sharp pain spearing into Han Li's soul. He hurriedly rose to his feet, just in time to see a massive gray shadow rising up from the forest down below, and it wasn't much slower than the carriage. Han Li immediately activated his bright-sight spirit eyes, upon which he was able to identify the gray shadow as an enormous gray bird with a fleshy black comb on its head. As opposed to feathers, the bird had a layer of short gray fur clinging tightly to its skin, giving it an unsightly appearance. At the same time, it was giving off a tremendous aura that indicated that it was at the pinnacle of the golden immortal stage. Han Li had no interest in getting caught up in a battle against such a formidable primordial beast, and he immediately swept a sleeve through the air to release a small white flag, which swelled to several thousand feet in size before unfurling itself to reveal a sea of clouds. This was one of the immortal treasures that Han Li had secured from Gongshu Jiu. The sea of clouds etched onto the flag began to glow with spiritual light, and a boundless expanse of white mist instantly surged out of the flag before descending toward the gray bird. The giant gray bird screeched as the comb on its head lit up with dazzling gray radiance, following which it flapped its wings vigorously, releasing a gust of gray wind that transformed into a formidable gray tornado. The gray tornado was giving off hints of law-power fluctuations. It tore through the sea of clouds with ease, then swept directly toward the flying carriage. At the same time, countless massive blades of gray wind appeared within the tornado, and it was clear that these were no ordinary blades of wind. Hanli hurriedly made a hand seal to bring the flying carriage to halt, then swept a sleeve through the air to release 3 yellow badges, which appeared in front, to the left, and to the right of the flying carriage. Waves of yellow light surged out of the 3 badges, forming a thick yellow light barrier around the flying carriage. As soon as the yellow light barrier took shape, it was instantly ravaged by the barrage of countless gray blades of wind, causing it to ripple incessantly, but ultimately it was able to keep the blades of wind at bay. Not only that, but the yellow light barrier was even able to repel some of the blades of wind, sending them hurtling back toward the gray bird, which immediately took evasive measures, seemingly quite wary of the blades of wind. At the same time, Hanli opened his mouth to release a burst of azure light that flew into the white flag, and another cloud of mist instantly surged out of the flag, before taking on the form of 7 or 8 dragons that wrapped themselves around the giant gray bird in a flash. These misty dragons were imbued with a great deal of immortal spiritual power from Hanli, and they were able to temporarily restrain the gray bird. However, instead of taking advantage of this opportunity to try and slay the bird, Hanli immediately made a hand seal to send the flying carriage racing around the giant gray bird as a streak of green light. A few moments later, a loud thump rang out from behind the carriage, and the gray bird had struggled free from the misty dragons before setting off in pursuit of the carriage once again. Hanli paid no heed to it as he continued to pilot the carriage onward, and it didn't take long before the gray bird was left far behind. After shaking off the gray bird, Hanli heaved a faint sigh of relief, then stowed the white flag and yellow badges away. No more than 2 hours later, a burst of buzzing rang out from up ahead, and a massive purple cloud erupted out of the forest down below before sweeping toward the flying carriage. Hanli focused his gaze on the purple cloud to discover that it was a swarm of countless purple hornets, each of which was the size of a millstone. They had sword-like hooked stingers that were glowing blue trailing along behind them, clearly indicating that they were filled with extremely potent poison. Hanli summoned those 3 yellow badges to protect the flying carriage once again upon seeing this. At the same time, he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a large crimson flag, which released a vast expanse of flames to create a sea of fire around the carriage, which continued to speed directly toward the swarm of purple hornets without pause. In the end, the carriage was only able to fly out of the swarm of hornets after a struggle that lasted close to 2 hours. At this point, Hanli was growing more and more concerned. As they continued onward, they encountered more and more obstacles, to the point that they had to endure up to several dozen attacks from primordial beasts and various primordial tribes every single day. Fortunately, Hanli was very well prepared, so he was able to weather those storms just fine, but their speed had been significantly hampered by these obstructions. What was even more concerning to him was that the gold-devouring Immortal didn't seem to be having the same problem. According to Jin Tong, no primordial beasts or tribes dared to attack it thanks to its tremendous power and formidable aura. There wasn't anything that Hanli could do aside from continue to forge ahead, but despite his best efforts, the distance between them and the gold-devouring Immortal was only continuing to shrink. 2 months later, a green jade flying carriage was racing over an ancient forest, leaving an extremely long trail of green light behind it. All of a sudden, it drew to an abrupt halt, and Hanli began adding a new batch of immortal origin stones onto the formation on the carriage. The formation had been burning through his immortal origin stones at a rapid rate, but it was a necessary sacrifice if they were to have any hope of keeping the gold devouring immortal at arm's length. At this moment, Jin Tong was seated with her legs crossed on the carriage with a sullen look on her face, while Xiao Bai was laying on the ground with an absent-minded expression. "Uncle, if we get to a point where we're no longer able to get away from that thing, are you going to abandon me and run away on your own?" Jin Tong suddenly asked with a concerned expression. A weary look flashed through Han Li's eyes as he chuckled. "If you have the time to be pondering nonsense like this, you should focus on recovering as quickly as possible, then get back into Xiao Bai's stomach. That thing's coming after us faster and faster. I have to spend almost all of my time in Xiao Bai's stomach now. It would be terrible if I were to die from asphyxiation in Xiao Bai's stomach before that thing even has a chance to get to me." Jin Tong sighed with a dejected expression. "You're one to complain. With you coming in and out of my stomach so much, I've been feeling really nauseous lately, yet you don't hear me whining. The next time the gold-devouring immortal comes chasing after us, I'm not sure I'll be able to resist the urge to throw you back up." Xiao Bai groaned. "If you don't want me to stay in your stomach, then you can stay in mine. Given how much natural treasures and immortal treasures you've eaten, perhaps eating you will allow me to make a breakthrough just like that pill cauldron did. When that time comes, the tables will be turned, and I'll be the hunter instead of the prey." Jin Tong countered as her eyes roamed over Xiao Bai in a sinister fashion. Xiao Bai immediately turned away in a fearful manner upon hearing this. Jin Tong was just about to tease Xiao Bai a little more when her smile suddenly stiffened, and she turned to Han Li with an urgent expression as she yelled, "Quick, uncle! It's coming again!" "Get back in Xiao Bai's stomach," Han Li instructed as an anxious look appeared on his face. Immediately thereafter, the flying carriage began racing through the air at his behest. At the same time, Jin Tong pulled out a soul armor talisman before adhering it onto her own body, then flew into Xiao Bai's mouth as a tiny golden beetle, while Xiao Bai transformed into a white jade pendant that was stowed away into Han Li's storage pouch. "Uncle, I can sense that it's coming even faster than before. Can we go any faster?" Jin Tong asked through voice transmission. "This is as fast as we can go for now. By your estimates, how much longer will it take for it to catch up to us?" Han Li asked. "If it can maintain its current speed, then it'll definitely be able to catch up to us within 1.5 months, Jin Tong immediately replied. Han Li's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this. Moments later, he swept a sleeve through the air to produce the map that he had received from the beast race, then examined it for a moment before bringing the carriage to an abrupt halt. "You betrayed my trust first, so don't blame me for this." All of a sudden, the flying carriage swiveled around and raced away in another direction. Over a month flew by in a flash. The flying carriage was darting over a vast mountain range, and by following the map, Han Li was able to pilot the carriage to a red valley. As they approached the entrance of the valley, Han Li stopped the carriage, then cast his gaze toward the valley's entrance from afar. There was a giant humanoid lion engraved into each of the 2 mountain faces on either side of the valley, and one of them had its arms crossed over its chest as if it were conducting a prayer, while the other was wielding a huge axe. In between the mountain faces was an enormous arched stone bridge, which was being patrolled by many foreign beings clad in suits of bone armor. These foreign beings were each twice the size of the average human and possessed extremely imposing physiques. Their faces were similar in appearance to humans. Each of them had a circle of roughly 5 or 6 lion heads growing around their faces. This place was called the Red Spiral Valley, and it was where the Menace Lion tribe, one of the beast race's 8 holy tribes, resided. Beneath the arched stone bridge were 3 giant semicircular caves, and vast volumes of water were gushing out of those caves, sending vast clouds of water vapor erupting into the air. While checking the map over a month ago, Han Li had discovered that they weren't very far away from the settlement of the Menace Lion tribe, so he had changed directions to travel to this valley. Along the way, Jin Tong would continue to periodically hide in Xiao Bai's stomach, but the gold-devouring beetle was coming after them faster and faster, so the distance between them was gradually shrinking, to the point that over the past few days, Han Li was able to sense the gold-devouring Immortal through his spiritual sense, without even requiring any alerts from Jin Tong. Han Li inspected the valley momentarily, then made a hand seal while chanting an incantation, and his aura was instantly suppressed to the point that it was virtually completely undetectable. Immediately thereafter, he swooped down from above, then descended into the murky river down below. A dull thump rang out as Han Li plunged into the river with a tiny splash, then commenced a rapid descent. Upon landing on the riverbed, he began to trudge his way upstream over the soft and loamy river soil, all the while doing his best not to use any immortal spiritual power. The terrain of the riverbed was extremely complex, and there were extremely powerful eddies and whirlpools at every turn, some of which were no less powerful than attacks from treasures. But thankfully, Han Li's physical constitution was so tremendous that he was able to make his way smoothly over the riverbed even without the use of immortal spiritual power. Before long, he had already arrived at the foot of the giant arched bridge by scaling up the gradually elevating riverbed. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly noticed bursts of irregular energy fluctuations surging through the water up ahead, and several hundred giant black fish that were each around 10 feet in length came swimming directly toward him. These black fish were covered in hard black scales that gave off a metallic sheen, and it was clear that these scales had been hardened and polished from being buffeted by the river sand that was being thrown up by the rapid currents. They opened their mouths to reveal rows of sharp teeth, clearly intending to intimidate Han Li, whose brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. After some deliberation, he could only heave an internal sigh before unleashing his reversal true axis ability, allowing him to slip through the school of giant black fish in the blink of an eye. Over the past few months, some of his time Dao runes had already recovered, so he was able to use his mantra-treasured axis. Sure enough, the guards of the Menace Lion tribe patrolling the bridge up above immediately detected the faint spiritual power fluctuations released through the use of Han Li's reversal true axis ability, and they all turned to look into the river. Go and raise the alarm. This could be an enemy attack from the insect race, the leader of the group of guards immediately instructed. Given how minor those energy fluctuations were, it's most likely a demon beast that inadvertently stumbled into the river. The black scale fish should be able to take care of it, another one of the guards said. Our chief isn't here right now, so we must be on our guard. In these sensitive times, even the most minor abnormalities must be accounted for. Go and raise the alarm, the leader of the guards reiterated. The other guard immediately gave an affirmative response before rushing over to the right side of the valley, and it didn't take long before the sound of a horn rang out across the entire valley. Even on the riverbed, Han Li was still able to clearly hear the sound. Immediately thereafter, the sound of one horn after another rang out, progressively getting deeper and deeper into the valley. Armor-clad Menace Lion beings immediately began flying out of the caves on the mountain faces on either side of the valley, and they were arranged into teams to scour the river for any enemy presence. At the same time, a series of massive wooden arqueballistas on either side of the valley were all aimed into the river, and the giant arrows in the arqueballistas were shimmering a faint green glow, indicating that they were smeared with lethal poison. Han Li made his way to a large rock in the river, then drew to a halt as he communicated through voice transmission. "You can come out and draw the gold-devouring immortal here now." "All right, you can count on me, uncle," Jin Tong replied with a sly grin. Immediately thereafter, a streak of golden light flew out of Han Li's sleeve, and Jin Tong appeared right beside him. After getting some stable footing on the riverbed, she closed her eyes before releasing her aura without any restraint. There was a menaced lion being dressed in red elder robes, standing on an altar to the left of the valley, and he was astonished to sense Jin Tong's immense aura. "Grand Elder Yin Tong, this aura. It seems to belong to that insect spirit," he exclaimed to an early golden immortal stage Grand Elder beside him with an incredulous expression. The Grand Elder by the name of Yin Tong was just as incredulous to hear this. "How is that possible? We just received word from our chief not long ago that we're facing off against the insect race army at the Dark Star Canyon. How could the insect spirit have suddenly come here? There must be a mistake." "Hold on, this aura seems to be different. Before the elder had a chance to finish his sentence, his voice abruptly cut off, and he was rooted to the spot in shock and horror. "What is it?" Grand Elder Yin Tong hurriedly asked. "There's another one coming," the elder murmured in a shell-shocked manner as he turned to the entrance of the valley. "What do you mean by that? Explain," Yin Tong urged in a frustrated manner. "There's another insect spirit, and this one seems to be at the high zenith stage," the elderly explained as he turned to Yin Tong with an ashen complexion. Yin Tong could hardly believe his own ears. After a brief moment of stunned silence, he suddenly turned and yelled, "Yin Liang, go and send a message to our chief. Yin Feng, evacuate all of the children, women, and elderly. Everyone else prepare for battle." There were 7 or 8 menaced lion tribe elders ranging from the late true immortal stage and the early golden immortal stage on the altar, and all of them immediately sprang into action. Below the giant rock on the riverbed, Han Li could clearly sense the gold-devouring immortal's enormous aura rapidly approaching them, and through its aura, he could even sense that it was currently extremely furious. "What did you do, Jin Tong? I can sense that its aura is very unstable, like it's extremely angry about something," Han Li asked. "All I did was ask it how it feels to be able to see me but not eat me," Jin Tong replied with a smile. "You can communicate directly with it?" Han Li asked with a stunned expression. "I can only sense it from far away, but now that we're so close, it's kind of like we can communicate through voice transmission. I don't know exactly how to explain it. It's like we're connected by an invisible thread, and neither one is able to shake off the other," Jin Tong replied with a shrug. Han Li wanted to ask more questions, but before he had a chance to do so, a deafening boom rang out in the distance, immediately following which a burst of tremendous shockwaves swept through the valley, causing the entire river to rear up like a reverse waterfall. At the same time, the arched stone bridge exploded down the middle, and the menaced lion beings standing on the remnants of the bridge were all looking on with furious expressions. These were all of the warriors of the menaced lion tribe that hadn't been sent to participate in the battle at the Dark Star Canyon, and weren't assigned with the task of evacuating the women, children, and elderly, and there were only around 4,000 to 5,000 of them. Yin Shen rose up into the sky above the ruined stone bridge, then asked in a scathing voice, "Why is an almighty insect spirit like yourself attacking our menaced lion tribe instead of facing our beast race army?" The enormous gold-devouring immortal was hovering in midair tens of thousands of feet away, and its flapping wings were producing a deafening noise. It paid no heed to Yin Shen as it scoured the valley back and forth with a pair of cold and furious eyes, then suddenly roared, "Come out!" Its voice was like rumbling thunder as it echoed throughout the valley, producing such powerful sound waves that the remnants of the stone bridge quickly fell away chunk by chunk. Yin Shen was only just barely able to steady himself, and a perplexed look appeared on his face as he asked, "Who are you looking for?" However, the gold-devouring immortal continued to ignore him as it crashed down toward the entrance of the valley like a golden mountain. "Warriors of the Menace Lion tribe, it's time to fight," Yin Tong declared. However, the gold-devouring immortal completely ignored all of the Menace Lion tribe warriors as it continued to crash down toward the entrance of the valley with tremendous power. All of the Menace Lion tribe warriors hurriedly rose up into the air before retreating into the valley, and at the same time, several hundred enormous griffin-like demon beasts rose up within the valley tens of thousands of feet away, then opened their beaks before producing a strange sound akin to the weeping of infants. In doing so, they were releasing bursts of peculiar sound waves that were further enhanced as they traveled through the horn-shaped valley, becoming progressively more formidable as they surged toward the gold-devouring immortal. Even though Han Li and Jin Tong weren't within the area that the sound waves were traveling through, he was still struck by a burst of sharp pain in his head, following which came a rush of dizziness and nausea. He hurriedly swept a sleeve through the air to conjure up a spherical light barrier that encompassed both himself and Jin Tong, and only then did the sense of discomfort subside. The rest of the valley was quite wide and spacious, but it abruptly tapered to an extremely narrow area at the entrance of the valley. After being enhanced by the tapered terrain of the valley, the sound waves had become countless times more powerful than before, and the gold-devouring immortal rushed headfirst into them as it swooped into the valley. Waves upon waves of invisible sound waves exploded violently, and it was as if something invisible were shattering into countless pieces, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. The gold-devouring immortal was instantly rooted to the spot, while its previously lucid eyes became glazed over, and it was as if its spiritual sense had been destroyed by these sound waves. "Looks like the Menace Lion tribe has some impressive tricks up its sleeve, Uncle. I can sense that its soul has been severely wounded, and it'll most likely be in this disoriented state for quite some time. Should we take advantage of this opportunity to kill it?" Jin Tong asked as her eyes lit up with excitement. Han Li was silent for a moment upon hearing this, then analyzed. "These shockwaves can indeed harm the soul, but I feel like they're more so intended for physical damage. While it's true that even I was affected, even if I had been in the direct path of these sound waves, I would have only been disoriented for 3 seconds at most. With that in mind, does it really make sense that these sound waves could incapacitate it so completely?" "You're saying that it's putting on an act to try and lure us out?" Jin Tong asked with a stunned expression. "There's no need for us to speculate. Someone else will find out for us," Han Li replied. Sure enough, in the valley above, Yin Tong was observing the gold-devouring immortal with a hesitant expression, but ultimately he gritted his teeth and ordered, "Attack!" In the sky above the valley's entrance, an elder immediately sliced open his own hand, shedding his blood onto his staff while chanting an incantation in the language of the true spirits. As he began his incantation, an extremely strange aura arose within the entire valley, and a layer of crimson mist emerged, enshrouding the entirety of the valley within it. Within the crimson mist, the eyes of all of the Menace Lion tribe warriors also turned a crimson color, while dark red light began to glow from their cheeks as a lion-like demon beast totem appeared on each of their faces. With the emergence of these totems, the Menace Lion tribe warriors underwent drastic transformations, swelling to several 100 feet tall. At the same time, the lion heads around their faces disappeared, and their humanoid faces turned into lion faces. Immediately thereafter, all of the Menace Lion tribe warriors sprang up into the sky to surround the gold-devouring immortal before attacking it all at once. Even though they had swelled drastically in size, they were still downright diminutive in comparison with the gold-devouring immortal, and all of them began tearing at the gold, devouring Immortal's body with their sharp claws. A string of loud clangs rang out incessantly, but the gold, devouring Immortal remained completely unscathed. "We have to find the weak points on its body," Yin Tong yelled as he charged toward the gold, devouring Immortal's eyes. Meanwhile, all of the other Menace Lion tribe warriors charged toward the gold, devouring Immortal's joints, the bases of its wings, and other perceived weak points, led by the tribe's elders. As he approached the gold, devouring Immortal's right eye, the crimson totem on Yin Tong's face glowed even brighter, and bursts of formidable spiritual power fluctuations surged through his meridians, converging toward the claws on his right hand. His arms swelled drastically in size while glowing with radiant red light, looking rather cumbersome and disproportionate compared with the rest of his body, but the explosive power that it contained was certainly not to be scoffed at. "Let's see if you can keep pretending now." Even though Han Li was unable to see the battle from the riverbed, he could roughly guess what was happening based on the spiritual power fluctuations that he was sensing. Yin Tong was injecting all of his power into this single strike, and he was already right in front of the gold, devouring Immortal's eye. In fact, he was so close that his claws could be seen reflected within the eye that he was attacking. However, right at this moment, the disoriented look in the gold, devouring Immortal's eyes abruptly faded, and it turned its gaze to Yin Tong in a cold and completely lucid fashion. As soon as Yin Tong saw this, he immediately felt as if his entire body had been plunged into a glacial pit, but at this point, it was too late to turn back. All he could do was yell for everyone to retreat, while he continued to thrust his claws toward the gold, devouring Immortal's eye. A sharp clang rang out, and a flurry of sparks flew in all directions as a gash that was over 100 feet in length was scratched into the gold, devouring Immortal's closed eyelid, following which semi-transparent liquid that appeared to be blood began flowing out of the gash. The gold, devouring Immortal's eyelid shuddered momentarily before springing open again, and it swept its front limbs through the air like lightning. A series of crescent-shaped streaks of translucent golden light erupted forth, sweeping through the air in all directions like scythes designed to harvest lives. Aside from the several hundred Menace Lion tribe warriors who were able to retreat in time after hearing Yin Tong's warning, everyone else, including Yin Tong himself, had been sliced into two. The gold-devouring Immortal had clearly been truly infuriated, and it flapped its wings vigorously as its enormous body began to revolve rapidly on the spot, quickly transforming into an enormous golden storm that erupted through the air in all directions. All of the dismembered Menace Lion tribe warriors instantly had their bodies and nascent souls destroyed within the golden storm, and even their blood had been reduced to the tiniest of particles that rained down from above. The remaining Menace Lion tribe warriors fled back into the valley, and the only remaining elder looked up at the sky with an expression of fury and despair. "The children, women, and elderly are still in the valley, so we cannot afford to retreat any further," the elder sighed. A determined look then appeared on his face as he roared with all his might. "I offer up my blood and my body to Master Jiu Ling. Please descend upon us." Immediately thereafter, he closed his eyes and plunged his staff right into his own heart. As the elder plunged his staff into his own heart, the other Menace Lion tribe warriors were also chanting the same thing as they pierced their claws into their own hearts, sending blood spilling all over the entire altar they were standing on. With the staff pierced through his chest, the elder's vitality was rapidly fading as if it were being sucked away by the staff, but his eyes were only glowing brighter and brighter. As the chanting continued, a layer of dark red light began to emerge over the blood-stained altar, and before long, the layer of light had risen up to form a pillar of dark red light that was over 10,000 feet tall. An enormous beastly projection appeared within the pillar of light, and it gradually took on a substantial form. It was a mountainous primordial true spirit with 9 lion heads growing on its neck. Its fur was a dark purple color, and the mane around its neck was glowing purple while rippling slightly like a clump of seaweed, resembling a dark purple flame. A furious look appeared in the true spirit's eyes at the sight of the horrific scenes in the valley, and all 9 of its heads let loose a thunderous roar of fury in unison. In contrast with the relationship between the other beast race tribes and the true spirits that they worshipped, the Menace Lion tribe were true descendants of the true spirit, thereby inheriting its bloodline. As a result, the bond between them was more intimate. "How dare you?" Jiu Ling roared, following which one of its 9 heads abruptly made an inhaling motion, releasing a burst of tremendous suction force. The blood of the Menace Lion tribe warriors that was permeating throughout the area converged from all directions before being sucked into its mouth. And at the same time, all of the altars littered throughout the valley suddenly lit up on their own. The totems engraved upon them began to glow brightly, and a series of lit purple braziers rose up from their centers. There were specks of faint purple light within these braziers that were drifting out like fireflies before surging into Jiu Ling's mouth alongside the blood of its descendants, and it let loose a low roar as its muscles began to bulge outward. At the same time, a layer of dark red scales emerged over its body, and the mane around its neck also grew to twice its original length, while its aura began to rapidly approach the mid-high zenith stage. On the riverbed, a hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon sensing this, and he remarked, "It seems like the Menace Lion tribe shares a different relationship with their true spirit than the other beast race tribes. It's a little similar to the ancestral god system of the Black Wind Sea. Through the sustenance of their bloodline and the power of faith imbued within the altar, perhaps this true spirit really will be able to put up a fight against the gold-devouring Immortal." "Really?" Jintong asked with a skeptical expression. Setting aside the bloodline sustenance from the Menace Lion tribe warriors, no one knows just how much power of faith has accumulated in these totems. It definitely won't be able to defeat the gold-devouring Immortal. It's just a matter of how much of a fight it can put up," Han Li said. A hint of intrigue appeared on Jin Tong's face upon hearing this, and she was suddenly struck by the urge to spectate the battle, but there was no time for that. Han Li gave her a pat on the head as he said, "We have to go." Jin Tong faltered slightly upon hearing this, then flipped a hand over to produce a soul armor talisman that she applied to her own forehead. Han Li also swept a sleeve through the air to summon Xiao Bai, which immediately swallowed Jin Tong. Moments later, a massive wave suddenly erupted out of the river, and a green jade flying carriage emerged before speeding away into the distance as a streak of green light, vanishing out of sight. Outside the river, the gold-devouring Immortal could sense that Jin Tong's aura had vanished once again, and as it looked up into the sky, a cold gleam flashed through its eyes as it set off in pursuit of the flying carriage. However, right at this moment, a vast expanse of purple light suddenly emerged in front of it, and bursts of purple flames surged directly toward it, forming a scorching sea of fire in its path. The gold-devouring Immortal turned to discover Jiu Ling's central head with its mouth wide open, releasing a torrent for purple flames. At the same time, the 4 heads on its left also had their mouths open to release gusts of white wind that swept the flames into a massive vortex, trapping the gold-devouring Immortal within. Simultaneously, its remaining 4 heads were releasing vast waves of purple lightning that were injected into the fiery vortex. Hundreds of enormous fiery vortexes were conjured up, all of which were connected by the purple lightning to form an extremely powerful suction force, transforming the entire surrounding valley into a restricted area. Anyone within this area would be made to feel as if their bodies and souls were being restricted by this burst of suction force, rendering them completely unable to get away. All they could do was watch helplessly as the fiery vortexes were drawn closer and closer to them by the purple lightning, until they were incinerated into nothingness. At the same time, the hundreds of griffin-like demon beasts that had appeared in the valley earlier also emerged to surround the sea of purple flames while releasing the same screeching sound as before, sending powerful shockwaves sweeping directly toward the gold-devouring Immortal. A serious look finally appeared in the gold-devouring Immortal's eyes, and it flapped its wings vigorously to release a burst of peculiar energy fluctuations. Inside the Dark Star Canyon, the chiefs of the 8 holy tribes were seated next to each on the large chairs inside the palace next to the waterfall, while the chiefs of the smaller tribes were seated around them. At the center of the palace was a bonfire that was popping and crackling incessantly. "Rest assured, everyone, our king has already made a full recovery," Newo Yan declared. "That is indeed a very good thing, but what I don't understand is why the insect spirit hasn't taken advantage of this opportunity to attack us all this time. Could it be that that human was able to inflict so much harm upon it that it's still yet to recover?" Wushi asked with a perplexed expression. "That's not very likely. If that human really were that powerful, then he wouldn't have snuck out of our Dark Star Canyon and only left that substitute behind," Yin Mei said with a shake of her head. "I agree. If he really had the power to do that, then he wouldn't have feared a battle against us while our king was still injured," Newo Yan chimed in with a nod. "Have we still not been able to track down that human, Chief Newo?" Yin Shen of the Menace Lion tribe suddenly asked. "Even though the insect spirit hasn't attacked us again, our 2 armies are still locked in a very tense confrontation. Hence, the number of people I can send out to search for him is very limited, and I doubt we'll be able to track him down anytime soon," Newo Yan said. A hint of displeasure appeared on Yin Shen's face upon hearing this, and he was just about to say something when his expression abruptly stiffened, following which he pulled out a palm-sized white bone badge. He slid his fingertip open before dripping a drop of blood onto the badge, and a layer of concealed runes and a totem symbol immediately emerged on its surface. Yin Shen then raised the bone badge to his own forehead with both hands, looking as if he were conducting a prayer. Moments later, his expression changed drastically as he abruptly sprang to his feet, doing so with such force that the large chair beneath him was completely pulverized. "What's wrong, Chief Yin Shen?" Newo Yan knew that something extremely important had to have happened for Yin Shen to display such a strong reaction. "The insect spirit attacked my red spiral valley," Yin Shen murmured in a stunned voice, seemingly struggling to come to terms with this information himself. "What? It led the insect race army to the Red Spiral Valley?" Wushi asked with a surprised expression. "No, it traveled to the Red Spiral Valley on its own, killing everyone there with the exception of the women, children, and elderly. Even Master Jiu Ling was." Yin Shen's voice trailed off there, as a grief-stricken look appeared on his face. "No wonder the insect race army hasn't attacked us since the initial attack," Yin Mei mused. "Does that mean that insect spirit currently isn't among the insect race army outside the Dark Star Canyon?" Deng Gui suddenly asked as his eyes immediately lit up. It was clear that he wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to send out the beast race army in retaliation and wipe out the insect race army once and for all. Yin Shen turned to Deng Gui with a furious expression upon hearing this, and only after a long while was he able to spit out the words, "I'm afraid my Menace Lion tribe won't be able to continue playing a part in this battle." "Don't make any rash decisions, Chief Yin Shen. The Red Spiral Valley is clearly already beyond saving, so it makes no difference whether you go back or not. Instead, You should stay here and help us vanquish the insect race army to avenge your brethren. I'm sure that's what everyone else present is also thinking, right? Deng Gui declared. No one in the palace responded, and the atmosphere had become rather awkward. While it was true that this was what everyone was thinking, no one was willing to directly articulate this thought. This is a completely unexpected tragedy, so I can understand Chief Yin Shen's desire to return to the Red Spiral Valley as soon as possible. Don't worry about the battle taking place here, and if you need any help with anything, feel free to speak up. Our Calm Dawn tribe will be sure to assist you in any way that we can, Newo Yan said with an earnest expression as he rose to his feet. Yin Shen's expression eased slightly upon hearing this, and he extended a parting salute toward Newo Yan as he said, Master Jiu Ling is extremely severely wounded, so he's no longer able to provide protection for our menace lion tribe. We won't be able to contribute much by remaining here anyway, so I'll be returning to the Red Spiral Valley. Rest assured, Chief Yin Shen, I'll inform Master Suliu and our king of what happened. I'm sure they'll be able to understand, Newo Yan promised. You have my thanks, Chief Newo. At this point, Yin Shen's heart was no longer here, and he hurriedly expressed his gratitude to Newo Yan before leaving the palace. Following his departure, all of the tribal chiefs contacted their respective tribes through the use of secret techniques, and they were all very relieved to confirm that their tribes hadn't been attacked by the insect spirit. What do you think of this, everyone? Newo Yan asked as he turned to all of the other chiefs in the palace. The insect race spent several decades to assemble this elite army consisting of several hundred tribes, yet after a single defeat, the insect spirit abandoned the army to attack the Red Spiral Valley on its own. It just doesn't make sense. Ulu mused with a perplexed expression. Indeed, not only does it not make sense, it goes against the insect spirit's personality as well, Marlon chimed in. After some discussion, none of them were able to make heads or tails of the situation. Meanwhile, Newo Yan was standing in the palace as well, and a thought had occurred to her. Back when Senior Li was at the Dark Star Canyon, the insect spirit led the insect race army on an excessively aggressive attack, and now that Senior Li has left the Dark Star Canyon, the insect spirit has inexplicably attacked the menace lion tribe. Is there really no correlation between these two events? She recalled that back when she first met Han Li, there had been a strange golden beetle accompanying him, and its aura had been rather similar to that of the insect spirit. However, it had slain the gray-toed beings without any hesitation, so she had regarded it as an ally, but thinking back now, she realized that something wasn't quite right. It was said that some insect race tribes like to engage in cannibalism. With that in mind, could it be that the insect race had attacked the Dark Star Canyon for the sake of Han Li's golden beetle? A chill immediately ran down Newo Yan's spine at this thought. If that were the case, then she was completely to blame for drawing the insect race army to the Dark Star Canyon. Her face instantly turned deathly pale as she lowered her head, not daring to share this theory with everyone. It wasn't that she was afraid that her father or someone else would be reprimanded for this. Instead, she was worried that revealing something like this would draw ire from the other tribes toward the Calm Dawn tribe, a consequence that was too much for her to bear. Several more months passed by in a flash. Even though the gold-devouring Immortal had managed to severely wound true spirit Jiu Ling of the Menace Lion tribe, it had also been significantly worn down during that battle, so it was unable to pursue Jin Tong with the same level of intensity as before. Hence, Han Li was able to enjoy a rare period of peace. However, that was only relative to the dire situation that they had previously been in. As they ventured deeper and deeper into the primordial land, the environment was becoming more and more complex, and they encountered many primordial beasts that were even more formidable than Han Li and Jin Tong themselves. Fortunately, at this point, they had begun to develop an understanding of the complex environment of the primordial land, and thanks to his enormous spiritual sense, Han Li was able to preemptively avoid these formidable creatures instead of inadvertently encroaching upon their territory. Even so, they were still unable to avoid being attacked by some primordial beasts, and regardless of whether they posed a threat or not, Han Li was unwilling to engage in battle against them for fear of being slowed down. Despite this, they were still inevitably slowed down quite a bit by these regular attacks. One night, Taoist Zai was piloting the flying carriage over a vast plain. As for Han Li, he was seated inside the cabin of the carriage, gently massaging a black jade slip in his hand. His brows were tightly furrowed as if he were contemplating something, and he seemed to be quite hesitant. After some time, he took a deep breath before pressing the jade slip against his own glabella. The jade slip contained the fourth level of the spirit refinement technique. After obtaining this jade slip, he had cultivated it briefly to resolve the earlier issue of backlash, but he had never fully mastered it, and he was planning to resume his cultivation once he crossed the primordial land and found a safe place to cultivate. However, in this situation, he was forced to scrap those plans. In the face of an opponent as formidable as the gold-devouring Immortal, he had to elevate his own powers as much as possible. It was too difficult to advance in his cultivation base in a short time, but perhaps there was a chance that he would be able to make some progress in the spirit refinement technique, which was also perfect as the gold-devouring Immortal's soul was its main weakness. As the jade slip lit up, Han Li gradually entered a state of immersive meditation. Meanwhile, Jin Tong was sitting on the edge of the flying carriage with her feet dangling over the side, and she was gently swinging them back and forth. Seeing as Jin Tong would always reappear in a different direction after spending time in Xiao Bai's stomach, the gold-devouring Immortal had changed its strategy. Whenever Jin Tong's aura disappeared, it would simply stop and wait, then continue its pursuit once Jin Tong re-emerged. Hence, Han Li was no longer making Jin Tong spend as much time in Xiao Bai's stomach as possible. Instead, he only resorted to this in some critical junctures. As a result, she was able to stay on the outside for longer than before. At this moment, her face was devoid of its usual smile, and it was as if she had suddenly become a lot more mature and quiet. It was certainly not a pleasant experience to be on the run from such a formidable enemy for so long. She looked down at the winding river on the plain below, and it resembled a shimmering white vein on the earth under the moonlight. She suddenly recalled that there was a similarly shimmering white crystal that she was still yet to finish, and she hurriedly summoned it before sinking her teeth into it as a blissful look appeared on her little face. There were no clouds in the sky, so the moon was made to appear particularly bright. Han Li was basked in a layer of faint white moonlight, making the lines of his face appear softer and more gentle. However, at this moment, his body was trembling slightly, and what appeared to be an eye had opened up on his glabella, while numerous translucent threads were flying in and out of the eye, presenting a peculiar sight to behold. Taoist Zai couldn't help but turn around to take a glance at Han Li upon sensing these strange energy fluctuations, and its brows furrowed ever so slightly with concern. At this moment, Han Li's spiritual sense fluctuations were rather unstable. It was like a bubble that was constantly expanding and shrinking, and that was indeed what Han Li felt like was happening in his consciousness. All of the spiritual sense in his consciousness was ebbing and flowing back and forth like the tide. The fluctuations were becoming more and more pronounced until they transformed into enormous waves. Some time later, his eyes abruptly sprang open, and he immediately began gasping for air. Jin Tong was very startled to hear this, and she hurriedly rose to her feet and rushed over to his side before asking, "Are you all right, uncle?" Han Li offered no response, merely stowing his black jade slip away with a slightly weary look on his face. He then swallowed a pill and wiped the sweat from his forehead as he replied, "I'm fine. I was just trying to rush a little in my cultivation earlier, and something almost went wrong." The fourth level of the spirit refinement technique was quite easy to understand, but the more he progressed, the more risk presented itself, and even the slightest lapse in concentration could lead to chi deviation. "You really scared me just now," Jin Tong said with a relieved expression. "Is the gold-devouring immortal doing anything new?" Han Li asked. "Not really, it's still just following us like usual. Right now it should be." Jin Tong began to examine what the gold-devouring immortal was doing through their spiritual connection as she spoke, and a grim look suddenly appeared on her face. "Is it close?" Han Li hurriedly asked with an alarmed expression. "No, but it's suddenly accelerated," Jin Tong replied. "How many days will it take for it to catch up to us?" Han Li asked. "I don't think we have days left, uncle. At this rate, it'll catch up to us in just a few hours," Jin Tong replied with a sullen expression. "Brother Zai, you take a rest, I'll pilot the flying carriage," Han Li said as he turned to Taoist Zai. Taoist Zai nodded in response, then flew up Han Li's sleeve as a streak of golden light. Han Li took a glance at the immortal origin stones embedded into the formation on the carriage, and he could tell that they didn't need to be replaced for now, so he focused on piloting the carriage, sending it racing forward at full speed. "Don't worry, go back into Xiao Bai's stomach for now. After that, I'll change directions a few more times to see if we can buy ourselves some time," Han Li consoled as he turned to Jin Tong. Jin Tong nodded in response, then pulled out a soul armor talisman, yet right as she was about to press it to her own forehead, her expression abruptly stiffened as she exclaimed, "It's sped up once again. It's burning through its own essential power. Has it gone insane? At this rate, it'll catch up to us in just 3 hours." "Looks like it's run out of patience," Han Li mused with tightly furrowed brows. All of a sudden, the green jade flying carriage drew to an abrupt halt at his behest. "Why did you stop, uncle?" Jin Tong asked with a perplexed expression. "This isn't going to work. It'll inevitably be able to catch up to us sooner or later," Han Li replied as he cast his gaze into the night sky. "But uncle, your time Dao runes still haven't fully recovered yet, so we have no chance against it in a battle," Jin Tong exclaimed. "Who told you we're going to engage it in battle? I'm just switching to a different strategy. Put on the soul armor talisman and go into Xiao Bai's stomach for now," Han Li said as a faint smile appeared on his face. Jin Tong immediately obliged, doing as she was told, while Han Li summoned Xiao Bai before swallowing her. After stowing Xiao Bai away, Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, "It sure is coming fast." The gold-devouring immortal had already entered Han Li's spiritual sensory range, so he no longer required any updates on its location from Jin Tong. Han Li stowed the flying carriage away with a sweep of his sleeve, following which flashes of silver lightning appeared in his eyes as he began making a string of hand seals. Before long, the arcs of silver lightning around him had swelled to form a silver lightning formation, and he abruptly vanished from within the formation amid a bright flash of lightning. Not long after Han Li vanished from the spot, a loud whooshing sound rang out in the distant sky, following which a speck of golden light appeared before rapidly expanding as it approached. The ball of golden light was as blinding as a second sun, and none of the living creatures nearby dared to gaze upon it. The edge of the golden light was as sharp as a blade, and all of the space in its wake was rippling incessantly, as if it were about to be torn apart. Finally, the ball of golden light drew to a halt where Han Li had been just a moment ago. As the golden light faded, a massive golden beetle was revealed, and it was none other than the high zenith stage gold-devouring immortal. It was clearly a little smaller than before, perhaps because it had burned through some of its essential power, or perhaps because it was still yet to make a full recovery from its battle against Jiu Ling. However, the fury in its eyes was burning brighter than ever. Not long ago, it had just received word from the insect race army that the beast race army had suddenly retaliated in full force, led by King Yohu and all of the true spirits, and the insect race army had suffered a catastrophic defeat and extremely severe casualties. What remained of the insect race army had already begun a full retreat, and it was inevitable that the beast race was going to be claiming a lot of territory in the wake of this battle. The insect race had been in prime position to win the war, but the tables had been completely turned. Even so, the gold-devouring beetle still had no intention of returning to the insect race. In other words, the survival of the insect race wasn't as important in its eyes as the hunt for the other gold-devouring immortal. After sensing the residual lightning aura in the air, the gold-devouring immortal stopped in its tracks and took some time to rest. In its past experience, it was a far better course of action to continue its pursuit once its target reappeared, as opposed to going in the wrong direction and having to double back. On top of that, it was confident that this type of spatial teleportation technique couldn't be used for long, and eventually, it was going to be able to capture its target. At the same time, a burst of violent spatial fluctuations suddenly erupted forth in the sky above a certain mountain, and countless arcs of lightning sprang out of thin air to form a massive silver lightning formation. Immediately thereafter, Han Li appeared within the formation, and after taking a moment to compose himself, he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a beast hide map, which he began inspecting carefully. Moments later, he stowed the map away, then pulled out another map before closely inspecting it as well. After inspecting several maps in a row, he began inspecting his surroundings with a contemplative look on his face. Shortly thereafter, he seemed to have decided on the direction that he wanted to go in, and he summoned his flying carriage once again before setting off as a streak of green light. Around an hour later, the flying carriage drew to a halt, following which he summoned Xiao Bai amid a flash of white light, and Jin Tong soon came flying out of its mouth. Her complexion was a little pale, and she looked around to discover that she was currently hovering in the air above a snowy mountain, upon which she hurriedly asked, "Where are we right now, uncle?" This area is no longer on the map given to us by the beast race, so we've most likely ventured so deep into the primordial land that we're already very far away from the beast race and insect race territories, Han Li replied. After a brief pause, he continued, "My spiritual sense is unable to detect the gold-devouring immortal at all now. Can you try and see if you can determine its location?" Jin Tong immediately closed her eyes and obliged, and some time later, her eyes suddenly sprang open as an elated look appeared on her face. "It's really far away now. I can still sense it, but the connection between us is far weaker than before." "That's good to hear, but we can't let our guards down. It doesn't seem like it's planning to give up at all. Xiao Bai, do you recognize this place?" Han Li asked as he turned to the Pixiu. "I feel like I came here once a very, very long time ago, but I can't remember clearly. The primordial land is enormous, and there are many places with similar terrains. Having said that, if we really have already left the territories of the beast race and the insect race, then we are indeed already deep in the primordial land," Xiao Bai replied. "It looks like things will only get more dangerous from here onward, but at this point, turning back is no longer an option, so we can only keep advancing. By my estimates, we should be going in the right direction, so as long as we keep going, we'll eventually reach the Black Mountain Immortal region. Jin Tong, stay out of Xiao Bai's stomach for now and make sure to keep constant tabs on the gold-devouring immortal. If it begins burning through its essential power again, notify me right away," Han Li instructed. You can count on me, uncle, Jin Tong vowed in a confident manner. Han Li then swept a sleeve through the air to summon Taoist Zai as he said, I'm going to resume my cultivation of the spirit refinement technique now. In the meantime, I'll have to trouble you to pilot the carriage for me in my stead, brother Zai. Taoist Zai naturally had no objections to this, and with that, Han Li made his way into the cabin of the carriage, then swallowed a pill before sitting down with his legs crossed. Ali. Close to a month passed by in a flash. At this moment, Han Li was piloting the flying carriage, which was racing over an enormous ancient forest. All of a sudden, he spotted a series of huge stone buildings peeking through the gaps in the trees down below through his peripheral vision. Out of curiosity, he brought the flying carriage to a halt, and upon closer inspection, he discovered that there was a massive stone city down below. The construction style of the city was completely different from anything that he had seen in the Immortal region and in the beast race settlements. It was constructed from countless giant stone blocks, upon which were engraved all types of peculiar beastly designs, none of which were identifiable to Han Li. However, most of these buildings were covered in thick layers of green moss, and many areas had already collapsed. There weren't any spiritual power fluctuations in the area, nor did there seem to be any living beings nearby, and the entire area was eerily quiet. After inspecting the ancient city for a moment, Han Li decided that it was best to continue onward rather than waste time inspecting these ruins. However, the white jade pendant hanging from his waist suddenly transformed into Xiao Bai amid a flash of white light, and it said, Master, there's an extremely valuable treasure under those ruins. I can smell it. Jin Tong was sitting at the back of the carriage with a bored expression, but she was immediately intrigued to hear this, and she sprang to her feet as she yelled, There's a treasure here. Where? The treasure is hidden underground beneath the city, and it's concealed by special restrictions, so I can't determine its exact location, nor exactly what it is. However, the special energy fluctuations that it's releasing indicates that it's definitely no ordinary treasure, Xiao Bai replied in an excited manner. You can't tell what it is just because there are some restrictions in the way. Why are you so useless? Try harder. Is it something of the same caliber as the pill cauldron that I ate before? Jin Tong asked in an urgent voice. Regardless of what it is, we don't have time to go after it. If we trigger the restrictions in the city and end up getting trapped here or delayed until the gold-devouring Immortal gets here, we won't be able to get away, Han Li said with a grim expression. Xiao Bai and Jin Tong were both very disappointed to hear this, particularly Xiao Bai. Even though we haven't encountered much trouble of late, we still have to be on our guard. We can come back to explore this place another time, but for now, we have to keep going, Han Li continued. I finally get a chance to make myself useful, yet it's all in vain. Master, if you let me enter that city, I'll be able to ascertain the exact location of the treasure in an hour at most, and perhaps I can even find a shortcut to the treasure. Can you just let me give it a try? Xiao Bai implored as it stood on the edge of the flying carriage and looked down at the ancient city below with intense longing in its eyes. Han Li was a little moved upon hearing this. There wasn't a single cultivator in the world who didn't love treasures, and it was clear that this had to be an extraordinary treasure, given how desperate Xiao Bai was to obtain it. But this was simply not the time to go treasure hunting. Right as he was about to say something, Jin Tong's expression suddenly changed drastically as she yelled, We have to get out of here, uncle. What's wrong? Han Li hurriedly asked. That thing's burning through its essential power again, and it's coming after us way faster than before, Jin Tong replied in an urgent voice. All right, go hide in Xiao Bai's stomach, Han Li immediately instructed without any hesitation. Jin Tong nodded in response. then put on a soul armor talisman in a well-rehearsed fashion before flying into Xiao Bai's mouth as a golden beetle. Immediately thereafter, Han Li stowed both Xiao Bai and the flying carriage away, then conjured up another giant lightning formation to teleport himself away. In the sky above an enormous canyon, long arcs of silver lightning sprang forth amid violent spatial fluctuations, forming a lightning formation in midair, and Han Li appeared at the center of the formation amid a rumbling thunderclap. He looked around momentarily before summoning his flying carriage, which immediately began racing forward as a green shadow at his behest. After that, he summoned Taoist Zai and instructed it to pilot the carriage in his stead, then sat down with his legs crossed to continue cultivating the spirit refinement technique. Countless kilometers away from Han Li, the gold-devouring Immortal was giving off blinding golden radiance as it flew through the air at an astonishing speed. Compared with how infuriated it had been in the past, it was now a lot calmer. Clearly, it had already grown accustomed to its target's strategy of periodically disappearing before reappearing elsewhere, and its strategy in response was just to keep pursuing its target without pause. Given its cultivation base and the incredible physical constitutions of all gold-devouring immortals, it could easily keep this up indefinitely. Close to a month later, as the gold-devouring Immortal began approaching once again, Han Li had no choice but to flee again using his lightning teleportation formation. Half a year later, the flying carriage was racing through a boundless sea of gray mist. The mist was churning like turbulent waves, significantly hampering the speed of the flying carriage. There were around a dozen gray lizard-like primordial beasts pursuing the carriage, every single one of which was at the golden immortal stage, while one of them was around twice the size of the others and giving off a high zenith stage aura. The lizard-like demon beasts were roaring with excitement as pillars of gray light erupted out of their mouths toward the flying carriage up ahead. Meanwhile, Han Li was piloting the carriage with a grim look on his face, doing his best to avoid the pillars of gray light, while Jin Tong, Xiao Bai, and Taoist Zai were at the back of the carriage, warding off the pillars of gray light that he wasn't able to evade. All the while, the gold-devouring Immortal continued to stalk them from several million kilometers away. 2 years later, on the boundless yellow desert, gusts of ferocious wind were howling incessantly, and the landscape was riddled with enormous tornadoes that stood like pillars between heaven and earth. There were bursts of yellow light flashing within the tornadoes, and they were giving off a tremendous rumbling noise that caused the surrounding space to tremble as waves of spatial fluctuations swept outward in all directions. Occasionally, 2 of these giant tornadoes would crash into one another, and countless spatial rifts would instantly appear as a result. A ball of green light and a ball of golden light were flying through the desert one after another, and both of them were doing their best to avoid the tornadoes while forging ahead with great difficulty. The ball of golden light was clearly much faster than the ball of green light in front of it, and the distance between the two was rapidly shrinking. All of a sudden, arcs of silver lightning erupted out of the ball of green light, instantly forming a silver lightning formation, following which the ball of green light vanished amid a rumbling thunderclap. Over a decade flew by in a flash. At this moment, a ball of green light was racing through the sky above a boundless swamp. The ball of light was green in color, but not a uniform green throughout. Instead, it was an amalgamation of all types of different shades of green. Despite so many shades of green being mixed together, the ball of light was somehow very nondescript, and it was able to camouflage itself against the surrounding space, making it very difficult to spot. With the ball of light was the flying carriage that Han Li and the others were on. The color of the flying carriage was far different from what it had been in the past. Previously, the carriage had looked as if it had been carved out of a single chunk of green jade, yet at this moment, it was a hideous patchy green color, as if something had been smeared over it. While the flying carriage was looking far more unsightly than before, this patchy green light that it was giving off was able to conceal all of its spiritual power fluctuations, as well as the spiritual power fluctuations emanating from the hexagonal formation on the carriage. This green substance was a type of spirit tree sap that Han Li had obtained by chance while passing through a primordial tribe, and it had spared him a lot of trouble. At this moment, there was a rather grim look on his face as he piloted the flying carriage, while a pale-faced Jin Tong was sitting beside him, nibbling on a spirit treasure. Xiao Bai was laying on the ground on his other side, and it was clear that it was also taking some time to recover. "It's less than 100,000 kilometers away now," Jin Tong suddenly reported. Han Li took a glance behind the carriage, and a hint of blue light flashed through his eyes, following which he turned back around to face forward again before making a string of hand seals. Arcs of silver lightning erupted out of his body, forming a lightning formation around the flying carriage, with countless lightning runes dancing within it. A rumbling thunderclap rang out as the lightning formation lit up, following which the flying carriage vanished in a flash. Mere moments after the flying carriage disappeared, a ball of golden light shot forth from afar, then drew to a halt where the flying carriage had just disappeared. The golden light faded to reveal the gold-devouring Immortal, and it inspected its surroundings momentarily, then continued onward with a cold sneer on its face. At the same time, a burst of spatial fluctuations erupted in the air above a lush forest countless kilometers away, and a ball of golden lightning appeared before rapidly spreading outward to form a golden lightning formation, at the center of which Han Li and the green flying carriage emerged. Han Li cast an incantation seal into the flying carriage, and it immediately continued onward while releasing the same patchy green light as before. Even though he had managed to open up some distance on the gold-devouring Immortal once again, he didn't relax in the slightest. Instead, he seemed to have only grown more concerned. He had been fleeing from the gold-devouring Immortal for over a decade up to this point, and during this time, he had encountered countless crises. Not only had they been attacked by all types of primordial beasts, they were occasionally even targeted by frighteningly powerful primordial true spirits, and that wasn't even to mention all the types that they had stumbled into different perilous regions. If it weren't for his immense spiritual sense, time law powers, and the large collection of powerful treasures and allies at his disposal, he would have most likely already perished in the primordial land even before the gold-devouring Immortal caught up to them. Of course, out of all of this, the gold-devouring Immortal still remained the most potent threat. Up to this point, he had pulled out all the stops, including even the lightning-restraining wood teleportation formation that could facilitate ultra-long-distance teleportation, and he had also attempted to lure the gold-devouring Immortal into some perilous areas in the hope that it would be slowed down. However, the gold-devouring Immortal was extremely formidable, and not only were the primordial beasts that it encountered completely unable to pose a threat to it, it was also able to negotiate all of Han Li's traps with ease. Whenever the situation became truly dire, Han Li would use his lightning teleportation formation to get away just in the nick of time. He possessed the lightning bird bloodline in his body, and he also had the divine devilbane lightning of his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords and the assistance of Taoist Zai. So as long as he didn't run out of immortal origin stones, he would be able to replenish his lightning power reserves indefinitely. But eventually, his resources were going to be exhausted. Even though Han Li did everything in his power to speed up his own recovery after unleashing his lightning teleportation formation, the process of conversion from immortal spiritual power to lightning power was a very time-consuming one, so it was certainly not sustainable. In particular, the gold-devouring immortal seemed to have recently realized the sticky situation that Han Li was in, and it was exerting even more pressure in its pursuit. As a result, Han Li's lightning power reserves were being quickly whittled down, and he was going to run out before too long. With that in mind, he heaved a faint sigh as he summoned his mantra-treasured axis. Most of the time, Tao runes on its surface had already recovered, and that was a very encouraging sight. With these time Tao runes recovered, even if the gold-devouring immortal were to catch up to them, he had some confidence in his ability to deal with it. Right at this moment, Jin Tong suddenly stood up as she declared, "I'm ready to go, uncle." Taoist Zai immediately took over piloting the carriage from Han Li upon hearing this, while Han Li made his way over to Jin Tong's side before sitting down with his legs crossed. He then pressed a hand over her glabella while chanting an incantation, and a layer of translucent light emerged over his glabella. As the incantation continued, the burst of translucent light grew brighter and brighter, and it flowed out of his body before surging into Jin Tong's head through the palm of his hand. A series of translucent spirit patterns instantly appeared on her forehead, and they were giving off faint spiritual power fluctuations. The cloud-like patterns that had appeared on Jin Tong's forehead were very similar to the ones imparted by soul armor talismans. Certain rare materials were required to craft soul armor talismans, thereby making them very expensive, and even with Han Li's enormous wealth, the expenditure was too much for him to maintain over a long period of time. Hence, he began to study the talisman, and he discovered that it worked by converting one's spiritual sense into a substantial form before transforming it into a protective barrier that was infused into the talisman for others to use. After figuring out the inner workings of the talisman, he immediately attempted to replicate it. On top of that, he had been cultivating the fourth level of the spirit refinement technique with every spare moment that he had. It was unclear whether he was truly really suited to cultivating the spirit refinement technique, or whether his latent potential had been brought to the fore by the constant danger that he was in. In any case, he had been making rapid progress in the fourth level of the spirit refinement technique. At this point, he had almost fully mastered it, and his spiritual sense had been enhanced by around twofold. With his enhanced spiritual sense, Han Li was better equipped to replicate the soul armor talismans, and even though he wasn't able to craft them due to a lack of materials, he was able to reference them to cast a layer of protection over Jin Tong's soul. Jin Tong opened her eyes, then flew into Xiao Bai's body as a streak of golden light. Meanwhile, Han Li took over from Taoist Zai again, then immediately changed directions before flying onward. Once again, the gold-devouring immortal found itself unable to detect Jin Tong's presence, and it gave a cold harumph, but it wasn't concerned at all. It could sense that its target was already nearing their limits, and they wouldn't be able to run away for much longer. With that in mind, the golden light radiating from its body grew even brighter as it raced forward at an even faster speed than before. Several more months passed by in the blink of an eye. In the sky above a primordial desert, a flying carriage was racing along like a bolt of green lightning, only appearing for an instant before vanishing into the distant horizon. On the flying carriage, Han Li wore a grim expression as he made a rapid string of hand seals. Taoist Zai and Xiao Bai were situated on either side of him, releasing a burst of yellow light and white light, respectively, into his body. Han Li's expression didn't betray his emotions, but internally, he was feeling rather frustrated. Over the past month, the gold-devouring immortal had been pursuing them like mad, and somehow, It had managed to speed up significantly, exerting immense pressure upon Han Li. He was forced to use his lightning teleportation formation on many occasions in succession in a short time, and at this point, the lightning power reserves in his body had completely run dry. At this point, the gold-devouring immortal was only several 100,000 kilometers away. Jin Tong was currently inside Xiao Bai's stomach, so they weren't in any danger for now. But once she came out, the gold-devouring immortal would be able to catch up to them in a very short time, and it had already been over an hour since Jin Tong had entered Xiao Bai's stomach. This meant that it wasn't going to be long before he had to directly face an enemy far more formidable than himself. Even in this dire situation, Han Li remained calm and collected. At this moment, he was releasing his spiritual sense to constantly keep tabs on his surroundings, and at the same time, his mind was racing as he tried to think of a way out of this predicament. All of a sudden, something caught his attention, and he looked down in a certain direction. At this point, the flying carriage had already emerged from the desert, and down below as a vast azure mountain range. The ground and all of the rocks on the mountains were all azure in color, presenting a rather peculiar sight to behold. Additionally, the world's origin chi here was far more abundant than it was elsewhere. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. According to past experience, certain powerful beings had to be residing in a place with such abundant spiritual chi. Perhaps there were even some powerful primordial tribes in this mountain range, and that could present an opportunity for him to save himself. With that in mind, he immediately activated his spirit refinement technique to release his spiritual sense with all his might. Right at this moment, Xiao Bai suddenly opened its mouth, and Jin Tong flew out from within. At this moment, her complexion was deathly pale, and her aura was also in a state of disarray, clearly indicating that she had only come out after reaching her absolute limits. "I can't stay in there any longer, uncle," Jin Tong said in a feeble voice. A hint of sympathy appeared in Han Li's eyes at the sight of her terrible condition, and he summoned a pile of spirit treasures for her as he said, "That's fine. Take a rest. I'll think of a way to save us." Jin Tong nodded feebly in response, then sat down before picking up a spirit treasure and stuffing it into her own mouth. Han Li took a deep breath as he continued to pilot the flying carriage forward, while scouring his surroundings with his spiritual sense. Even though the Azure Mountain range was very abundant in spiritual chi, there were no perilous terrains that could be used to his advantage, nor any signs of settlement from powerful primordial tribes. As he continued to fly onward, his heart slowly began to sink. Several 100,000 kilometers away, the gold-devouring immortal was racing through the air with cold, killing intent flashing in its eyes. The golden light radiating from its body was glowing brighter and brighter, resembling a scorching golden flame, and it sped up even further. It could clearly sense that the distance between itself and its target was rapidly shrinking. Right at this moment, a burst of azure light flashed over a mountain face deep in the Azure Mountain range, and the rock face began to warp, transforming into a giant face that cast its gaze toward the gold-devouring immortal. The gold-devouring immortal paid no heed to this. Its only objective was to capture its target, so it merely ignored anything else that didn't actively get in its way. It continued to accelerate as it flew past the mountain face without pause, and as time passed, it spotted a speck of green light on the distant horizon up ahead. The ball of green light was flying away from the gold-devouring immortal, but at a far slower speed. The gold-devouring immortal's eyes instantly lit up with excitement upon seeing this, and it let loose a piercing screech as it sped up even further. Just a few seconds later, it appeared directly behind the ball of green light, which contained the flying carriage that Han Li was on. Han Li and others were all very alarmed and panicked at the sight of the gold devouring Immortal, and upon spotting the panicked expressions on their faces, a sense of immense joy welled up in the gold devouring Immortal's heart. It opened its mouth to release a thick pillar of golden light, which appeared behind the flying carriage in a flash before crashing down with tremendous power. Standing on the carriage, the spiritual light around Han Li's body brightened significantly, as did the green light emanating from the flying carriage, and it moved several kilometers horizontally in the blink of an eye, allowing it to just barely evade the pillar of golden light. However, the pillar of golden light then suddenly exploded into countless thin rays of golden light, which resembled countless golden flying swords that hurtled directly toward the flying carriage. A resounding boom rang out as the flying carriage exploded into a ball of radiant green light, following which a streak of azure light shot out from within before fleeing into the distance. A cold sneer appeared on the gold devouring Immortal's face as it lashed out with one of its front limbs, unleashing a massive blade of golden light that was close to 10,000 feet in length. The blade of light was curved to resemble the blade of a scythe, and there was a layer of rippling golden light over its surface as it swept through the air with tremendous power. Bursts of immense invisible force were erupting out of the blade, causing the entire space within a radius of several dozen kilometers to compress forcefully toward the streak of azure light from all directions. The streak of azure light was instantly slowed down significantly as a result. Right at this moment, a thunderous roar rang out from within the streak of azure light, and a giant furry golden fist abruptly emerged amid a flash of golden light. There were countless golden runes surging around the fist, and it was crashing toward the giant golden blade up above with unstoppable might. At the same time, a piercing screech rang out as a huge streak of translucent golden light erupted forth, transforming into a golden sword projection that was over 10,000 feet in length before sweeping toward the giant golden blade as well. The golden sword projection was extremely fast, leaving a trail of afterimages in its wake, yet as soon as it clashed against the giant golden blade, it was instantly sliced into two. However, the golden light radiating from the giant golden blade also shuddered unsteadily, while its downward momentum was also somewhat arrested. Right at this moment, the golden fist struck the golden blade with tremendous power. An earth-shattering boom rang out as a burst of blinding golden light erupted in all directions alongside waves of immense power that eradicated the restrictive force in the surrounding space. The giant fist was almost sliced into two, and blood immediately came gushing out of the wound, but the golden blade had also been destroyed. A massive golden ape stumbled unsteadily out of the golden light, and it was panting heavily, while large sections of its fur were stained red with blood. On one shoulder of the golden ape stood Jin Tong in her beetle form, while standing on his other shoulder were Xiao Bai and Taoist Zai, both of which had rather unsteady auras, indicating that they had been injured when the flying carriage was destroyed. Furthermore, Taoist Zai's left arm was nowhere to be seen, while Xiao Bai was carrying a massive gash on its back. Jin Tong cast a vicious gaze toward the gold-devouring Immortal, but the fear deep in her eyes was very apparent. The gold-devouring Immortal paid no heed to Han Li and the others as it focused its gaze solely on Jin Tong, and a hint of greed flashed through its eyes. In the next instant, it abruptly vanished from the spot. The giant golden immediately sprang into action upon seeing this, darting away to the side as a massive golden shadow. However, right at this moment, an even faster streak of golden light emerged before flashing past the golden ape, instantly inflicting a deep wound that began bleeding profusely. The golden ape flew away into the distance before drawing to a halt, and it was revealed that a massive gash had been sliced into its body from its chest to its lower abdomen, and the wound was so deep that bone was visible through it. At the same time, one of Jin Tong's front limbs had also been severed, and there was a pained look on her face. Meanwhile, the streak of golden light drew to a halt not far away, then faded to reveal the gold-devouring Immortal, which was holding Jin Tong's severed front limb in its mouth. A burst of golden light flew out to sweep up the limb before sucking it into its mouth, and a blissful look appeared on its face, as if it were savoring the finest delicacy in the world. The giant golden ape hurriedly pressed a hand over the huge gash that had been sliced into body, and a layer of green light flashed over the palm of its hand, upon which the massive gash quickly sealed, while the bleeding also ceased. Immediately thereafter, it sprang through the air before taking on Han Li's azure Luan bird form amid a flash of azure light, then began flying away as quickly as it could. At the same time, bursts of golden light emerged from the azure Luan bird's body, and the faint projection of a rapidly revolving golden wheel could be seen within the golden light. All of a sudden, around a dozen identical golden and azure projections emerged from the azure Luan bird's body, all of which were also giving off identical auras as they shot forth in different directions, and they were no slower than the gold-devouring Immortal. A hint of surprise flashed through the gold-devouring Immortal's eyes as it sensed the time-law aura emanating from the golden wheel, and it lashed out with both of its front limbs in unison. Violent spatial fluctuations instantly swept through the surrounding area in a radius of several hundred kilometers, and countless bursts of radiant golden light erupted out of thin air, instantly forming a golden spirit domain that encompassed all of the azure Luan bird projections, slowing them down significantly.